You've been told to live in the moment, to just be present, but no one ever told you how. How do you slow down when your mind won't stop racing? How do you enjoy the now when the past haunts you and the future scares you? You try meditation, but you get distracted. You try breathing, but it feels fake. And deep down, you wonder, am I broken? Why can't I just be? The truth is, presence isn't something you force. It's something you gently return to. It's not about being perfect. It's about being here. Here, in your body. Here, in this breath. Here, in this soft moment of stillness where nothing has to be fixed. For thousands of years, monks, mystics, and sages have studied this, not to escape life, but to feel it fully, to find peace not by changing the world, but by changing how they show up in it, fully awake, fully grounded, fully alive. Tonight you, 39, going to learn what they knew, not through effort, but through surrender, not through striving, but through stillness. And as you listen, something inside you will shift. The noise will quiet. The tension will melt. Your mind will slow, and your heart will open like a flower at sunrise. This isn't just a bedtime story. This is a return to your true self. Gentle, present, free. Are you ready? Let's begin. There's a kind of truth you only hear when everything else goes quiet, not in noise, not in thinking, not in talking, but in stillness. A space where nothing is said, yet everything is understood. That's where we're going now, where words fade, but meaning deepens, where silence isn't empty but full of wisdom. Let's go there together. They say silence is awkward. But what if that's only because we've forgotten how to listen to it? In our world, silence is often filled. We fill it with music, with scrolling, with background noise, with conversations that mean little but feel safe. We fear it, not because it harms us, but because it reveals us. Silence shows us what we've been running from, that quiet ache under the surface, the thoughts we don't want to face, the emotions that rise when we stop distracting ourselves. But in Buddhist practice, silence isn't something to escape. It's something to meet, to sit with, to bow to, because silence isn't nothing. Silence is space, and space is where awareness breathes. In monasteries tucked deep in the forests of Thailand, in cold stone temples in Japan, in humble rooms. In Sri Lanka, you'll find monks sitting for hours, not moving, not speaking, not because they have nothing to say, but because they've discovered the power of not saying. This is not just about outer silence, it's about quieting the storms inside. There's a difference between being silent and being still. You can be silent and still be full of noise. That voice in your head, judging everything, that inner commentary narrating your entire life, that restless mental itch that says, "This is boring, what's next?" But when you truly enter silence, not as absence, but as presence, something changes. The voice quiets. The mind softens. You begin to feel the subtle hum of being, the breath as it moves in and out, the weight of your body resting on the earth, the air brushing against your skin. Suddenly, you're not lost in thoughts about life. You're inside it, not planning, not regretting, just here. And here is where healing begins. The Buddha taught that silence can be a kind of speech, not the silence that avoids or suppresses, but the silence that listens, the kind of silence that pays attention without trying to control. It's not passive. It's alive. It listens to pain without flinching. It listens to joy without clinging. It listens to fear without judgment, and it teaches us how to stay. When you stop talking to the world for a moment, the world starts talking to you in a different way. The wind seems to carry messages. The birds are no longer background, they're presence. The distant sound of a train, the ticking of a clock, the breath of a loved one sleeping nearby it, all becomes sacred. But you won't notice any of that if you're too busy trying to escape silence. We've been taught that our value is in doing, in speaking, in producing. But what if the greatest transformation happens in the pause? Not in what you do, but in what you let go of. Silence helps you notice what you didn't even know was hurting. That tiny voice inside that says, "I'm tired." Not tired from work, tired from pretending, tired from constantly trying to be someone, to keep up, to prove something, to be enough. And in the quiet, you start to see that you were always enough. Even when you weren't achieving, even when no one was clapping, even when it was just you sitting there, breathing. In Zen, they call it beginner's mind, a way of seeing the world as if for the first time, noticing the steam from your tea, the warmth of your sweater, the way your chest rises gently with each breath. It's ordinary, but also extraordinary, because for the first time you're with it, not thinking about it, not recording it, just here. This kind of silence is not about muting life, it's about hearing life more clearly, like turning down a loud radio so you can hear your own heartbeat. It also teaches restraint, not just in speech, but in reaction. When someone insults you and you don't speak, not out of fear, but out of clarity, you reclaim your power. When you pause before reacting, you create space for wisdom to rise. In that pause, you ask, is this helpful? Is this kind? Is this necessary? Sometimes silence is the most loving response. But silence can also feel lonely, can't it? Because in that space, you meet yourself without filters. The guilt, the grief, the longing, the memories you buried, they all float up in the quiet. And your first instinct may be to turn away. But if you stay, if you breathe through it, that ache transforms. Because what you're really meeting is your own humanity, and that's never something to run from. The heart, when listened to in silence, will always guide you, but you have to be brave enough to hear it. Not just the parts you like, but the ones that make you feel vulnerable. The "I miss you", the "I'm scared", the "I need help". Silence gives these truths room to speak, and the more you practice listening, the less afraid you become of what you find. This is why monastics take vows of noble silence, not to punish themselves, but to see what remains when the ego stops trying to prove itself through words. When you remove the need to constantly respond, defend, explain, you meet what's underneath all of that. A still, spacious awareness, not grasping, not pushing, just being. And this presence, it changes how you see everything. You start to notice the way emotions rise and fall, like waves, without needing to stop them. You witness thoughts come and go, like clouds moving across a vast sky. You realize that silence isn't something you enter, it's something you uncover. Because silence is always there, it's just buried under noise, noise of worry, noise of memory, noise of stories we tell ourselves. But when you sit and you breathe and you don't run away, you rediscover it. Like sunlight breaking through after a long storm, there's also a compassion that grows in silence. Because when you become quiet enough to feel your own suffering, you begin to understand others. You speak less, but when you do, your words come from a deeper place, not to impress, not to defend, but to connect, to comfort, to guide. The Buddha once stayed silent when asked a question about metaphysics. Why? Because not all questions are meant to be answered with words. Some are meant to be sat with, felt, lived. And you start to learn that silence isn't about stopping life, it's about becoming intimate with it. When you're silent, you can feel the truth of impermanence more clearly. You can watch a thought rise and vanish without clinging to it. You can feel a wave of sadness and know it won't stay forever. You can enjoy a moment of peace without needing to photograph it. This kind of silence isn't fragile, it's strong, not because it blocks the world out, but because it lets the world in, fully, without fear. And when you return to your life, your conversations, your tasks, your relationships, something inside you has shifted. You don't need to fill every moment. You don't need to rush into the next thing. You carry stillness with you. That's the real teaching of silence. Not to escape the world, but to meet it with calm. Not to reject noise, but to respond to it with clarity. You begin to speak with intention. You begin to pause before reacting. You begin to see that presence doesn't always look like doing something big. Sometimes it looks like being still while the world moves around you. And slowly your nervous system rewires. Your relationships deepen. Your mind stops needing constant stimulation. You rest, not because everything is perfect, but because you've made peace with what is. This is the Dharma of silence. Not a retreat from life, but a return to it, more honest, more present, more awake. Now that you've felt it, this deep stillness, don't rush to fill the space. Let the silence linger. Let it echo. Let it teach you. And let it stay. And once silence has softened the noise inside, something even more subtle begins to rise. You start to feel the quiet rhythm underneath all things. It, 39, S not loud. It, 39, S not dramatic. It's the one thing that never leaves you, not in pain, not in joy, not even in sleep. The breath, it stays with you like a steady companion, whispering truths without saying a word. And when you learn to meet it, not control it, not analyze it, but simply meet it, your whole relationship to life begins to change, not through effort, but through awareness, through the tiniest shift of attention. That's where we begin now. Awareness doesn't need grand gestures. It doesn't ask for silence retreats or mountaintop moments. It lives in the small, in the subtle, in the way your chest lifts and falls when no one's watching, in the tiny pause between in-breath and out-breath. That's the space where presence waits, not the kind of presence you perform, but the kind you feel deep in your nervous system, the kind that lets you know, I'm here, I'm safe, I'm real. Most people wait for calm to arrive from the outside, for the right mood, the right space, the right day. But micro-awareness isn't about waiting, it's about noticing what's already here. One breath, not the whole hour, not the whole day, just one breath, and not even the whole breath, just a part of it. The coolness at the nose, the warmth as it leaves, the soft movement in your ribs. Each part carries its own lesson if you stay close enough to feel it. This is where things begin to shift. Because the mind is used to skipping over what feels simple, it wants to jump ahead, to label, to solve. But the breath isn't asking for that. It's only asking for you to stay, not forever, just long enough to truly know it, long enough to feel where it goes when you're sad, what it does when you're anxious, how it changes when you tell the truth, or when you hold something back. Micro-awareness is about meeting those changes with curiosity, without needing to fix them. It's not meditation in the formal sense. It's not sitting still for hours. It's the practice of tuning into the moment as it unfolds through the body, not the mind. Because the body tells you things the mind can't. It holds your story in breath patterns, in tension, in softness. You learn to read it by slowing down. And as you do, your perception sharpens. You start to feel where your breath catches when someone touches a painful subject, where your breath shortens when you feel exposed, where it deepens when you feel safe. That kind of awareness makes you more honest, not just with others, but with yourself. You can't lie to yourself when your breath is telling the truth. You can't hide in distraction when your body is calling you back. Micro-awareness brings you to this moment in full detail. It invites you to feel the weight of your clothes, the texture of air against your face, the subtle hum in your fingertips. These aren't details most people notice, but they're the fabric of your life. And when you live inside that fabric, things change. You eat slower. You listen better. You speak with more care. You stop needing to escape what is already rich. Most stress comes from leaving the moment, from resisting it, from needing it to be something else. But when you breathe with it fully, it doesn't need to change. You meet discomfort with openness. You let yourself feel tightness without running. You let joy be joy without clinging. It sounds simple, but it takes practice, attention, the kind that sees a single breath as enough. The beauty of this practice is how accessible it is. You don't need time. You don't need equipment. You don't need the right mood. You just need willingness. Willingness to stop for 5 seconds and feel one breath fully. Willingness to step into sensation instead of story. To follow the breath instead of the thought. And each time you do, your capacity to stay present grows. This isn't about perfection. You'll forget. You'll drift. You'll get caught in thought. But the moment you notice, that's awareness too. And that moment is powerful. It breaks the automatic loop. It brings choice back into the picture. That's how patterns begin to shift. Not all at once, but one breath at a time. With patience, with kindness, with presence. There is wisdom that only reveals itself in this kind of still attention. It doesn't come from reading, it comes from feeling. The breath becomes your teacher, showing you where you're open, where you're closed, where you're resisting, where you're trusting. And all of this happens without words, without analysis, just sensation and awareness held together. As this awareness deepens, your whole body becomes a field of practice. The breath moves in the belly, and you start to feel where fear lives. It rises in the chest, and you meet your vulnerability. It shifts at the throat, and you feel the words you haven't spoken. The ones stuck between yes and no, between truth and comfort. You don't have to force anything. You just breathe and notice. That noticing is not passive. It's the beginning of transformation. Because when you feel your patterns, you stop being ruled by them. You don't fight them. You don't argue. You understand them. You hold space for them. And from that space, something softer emerges. A choice, a new response, a fresh breath. What used to be background becomes foreground. What used to be ignored becomes sacred. The way your fingers twitch, the way your spine shifts, the way your toes grip the floor when you're tense, all of it matters. Not because it's dramatic, but because it's real. And when you start valuing what's real, even the mundane becomes meaningful. You start to see how nothing is truly small. One breath can show you your entire inner world. One sensation can reveal an old memory. One pause can save you from saying something you'll regret. That's the power of micro-awareness. It turns ordinary moments into teachers. It turns discomfort into wisdom. It turns presence into a way of life. And life, as it turns out, happens mostly in the small, not in the breakthroughs, not in the highlights, but in the unnoticed moments between. That's where your nervous system finds safety. That's where your heart learns to open. That's where your soul feels seen, not because anyone is watching, but because you are. This attention doesn't require effort. It requires interest, a quiet kind of care, the same care you'd give to a friend who's hurting, a gentleness that says, "I'm here, I see you, let's breathe through this together." Over time, this becomes your new normal. You start catching yourself mid-reactivity, you feel anger rising, and you breathe with it instead of lashing out. You feel anxiety surge, and you stay with the body instead of fleeing into thought. You notice tension before it becomes pain. You meet restlessness before it becomes burnout. And something even deeper starts to grow: trust. Not the kind built on outcomes, the kind built on knowing you can be with yourself no matter what, that you don't need to fix everything right now, that you can feel your way through it, that you can stay. From this place, your relationships shift too. You stop talking over people. You feel their breath, their pauses, their unspoken words. You hold space not just for their voice, but for their presence. And they feel that. People know when you're really there, when you're not waiting to speak, when you're listening with your whole body. This is what micro-awareness teaches you, not just how to breathe, but how to live, how to show up, how to feel fully, without needing to escape, without needing to dramatize, just to be, with all of it. That one breath, the one you're taking, no, it's not separate from enlightenment. It's not a warm-up. It's not a preparation. It's the doorway itself. And you don't have to force yourself through it. You just have to notice it. One breath, one sensation, one moment at a time. And when you do, something subtle changes. Life doesn't become easier, but it becomes clearer. You stop reaching for clarity out there. You start sensing it in here. The answers stop shouting. They start whispering. And the whisper is enough. So the next time the world feels too loud, too fast, too much, don't try to solve everything. Don't try to fix the future. Come back to what never left. The quiet rhythm of life itself. The breath. Stay there. Feel to it. Trust it. Because presence isn't built in one leap. It's built in thousands of tiny moments you didn't rush past. Thousands of breaths you chose to meet. Thousands of seconds you decided were worth your full attention. That's the power of micro-awareness. It teaches you to fall in love with now, not the idea of now, but the felt experience of it. Fully, gently, deeply, without needing more, because this breath, this one is already enough. And once the breath becomes familiar, once you can rest your full attention inside a single inhale, what comes next isn't effort, it's spaciousness. There's a natural opening, a quiet shift where awareness begins to stretch wider than the body. Thoughts slow, edges blur, and something strange happens. You stop being tracked by minutes. You stop being pulled by the idea of time. Awareness begins to float in something softer, where the past no longer presses and the future no longer pulls. There's still movement, But it's not rushed, not counted, not measured. It's just now, alive, whole, and untouched by the clock. What most people call time is not what you feel. It's a mental overlay, a system of counting, of sequencing, a way the mind organizes experience to make sense of change. But awareness doesn't operate through numbers. It doesn't divide now into categories. It doesn't count breaths. It doesn't label years. It simply sees. It simply knows. The direct experience of this moment doesn't ask how old you are, what hour it is, or what you have to do next. It just unfolds, effortlessly, without division. This kind of presence is available to anyone, but it takes a shifter, gentle untangling from the thought, patterns that grip chronological time. Because time, as we usually live it, isn't neutral. It rushes us, pressures us. It defines identity, success, regret, expectation. We become attached to timelines, to deadlines, to storylines, and slowly we forget how to just be. We start measuring everything, how far we've come, how far we have to go, whether we're ahead or behind. But who is measuring, and against what? Buddhist psychology invites you to step outside of that system, not to deny time's function, but to stop mistaking it for reality. Time is useful, it helps organize, but it's not who you are, it's not where you live. Awareness exists before the clock, beyond the calendar. It doesn't need markers to know presence. The practice, then, is not to fight time, but to stop clinging to it, to stop anchoring identity to what happened, or what might happen, to loosen the mental fixation on sequence and return to direct experience. One technique is to notice how often your thoughts refer to time. In ordinary moments, the mind runs forward and backward, rehearsing, remembering, anticipating, comparing. But these are all mental projections. The body doesn't live in them. The breath doesn't follow them. And neither does your deepest awareness. So, when you catch the mind replaying an old conversation or preparing the next task, don't try to stop it. Just recognize it as movement in the mind, not the truth of the moment. Then, shift. Drop back into sensation, into contact, into presence. Another way to soften time's grip is to explore your relationship with the past. Most attachment to time comes from unfinished narratives, stories we tell ourselves, things we wish had gone differently, mistakes, loss, identity frozen in memory. But memories are not facts, they are reconstructions. They're shaped by mood, by belief, by repetition, and the past only enters now when you bring it. You can honor your history without living in it. You can acknowledge pain without keeping it active. When you sit in silence, you start to see how many layers of past echo through your thoughts. Even preferences are conditioned, even reactions are rehearsed. But the more you see these echoes, the more space opens around them. The grip loosens. You realize that you're not just the sum of your past choices. You're the awareness seeing it all unfold right now. And that awareness, it's not bound by time. Likewise, your future doesn't exist except as thought. Planning has its place, but obsession with what's next creates constant tension. The mind plays endless simulations. What if? Then what? After that? But none of them are real. They're shadows, projections, and each time you chase one, you leave the clarity of now. So the practice becomes returning, over and over, to the body, to the breath, to the sound around you, to the contact of feet on the floor, hands on your lap, heartbeat in your chest. None of that needs time. You can also work with language. Start noticing how much of your speech is time-based. Later, soon, before, when I was, once I get. These phrases organize reality around imagined points. But you can shift that. Instead of saying, I'll be okay when, notice what is okay now. Instead of, I used to be happier, ask what happiness feels like in this moment. Words shape experience, and loosening time. Bound language helps loosen time-bound thinking. Physical practices help too. Slow walking, breathing with attention, tasting food without rushing. When you move slowly, the body reclaims rhythm from the clock. You stop measuring moments and start sensing them. You start to feel duration not as a number but as richness. A full inhale, a long gaze, a silent pause. These moments stretch open. They're not timed, they're lived. This presence changes your sense of age. People carry timelines of who they're supposed to be by a certain point, where they should be, what they should have. But those timelines are social, not spiritual. They are narratives created by culture, not by truth. The truth is, no one is behind. No one is ahead. Everyone is exactly where they are, one breath at a time. The wisdom that grows in you isn't measured in years. It's measured in depth, in honesty, in how fully you meet this second. Meditation reveals this naturally. When you sit and follow the breath, time starts to dissolve. Minutes pass without reference. There's no beginning, no end, just awareness opening. You begin to feel space, not as emptiness but as fullness, not as a void but as presence without boundary. And when you open your eyes, the world looks different. The pressure eases. There's less rush to get somewhere, because you already are somewhere, and it's enough. Letting go of time also changes your relationship to control. Much of the anxiety around time is really anxiety about uncertainty, not knowing what's coming, not being able to hold it all together. But in presence, you stop trying to hold it. You allow things to arise, to unfold, to fade. That's not passivity, it's deep trust. A knowing that life has its own rhythm, that you don't have to direct every second, that presence can carry you farther than planning ever could. You start to experience events without labeling them, not as interruptions, not as steps on a ladder, just as a rising experience, sound, sensation, feeling. And in that simplicity, something radical happens. You begin to feel timeless, not eternal in a grand sense, but free from the grip of narrative, untethered, just being without needing to become. This is not disconnection, it's not floating away. It's grounding so deeply in what's real that all the mind-made labels fall away. You stop asking, what time is it? You start asking, what's happening right now? And that question never leads you into illusion. It always brings you back. It's helpful to notice when the mind tries to reattach. It will say, you're wasting time. You're falling behind. This isn't productive. But who defines productivity? Who defines value? Awareness doesn't care how much you get done. It cares about how fully you live. And when you live fully, you do what matters, not out of pressure, but out of clarity. Disentangling from time doesn't mean ignoring reality. You still show up. You still keep commitments. You still move through days and months. But you hold it all more lightly. You stop letting the calendar define your worth. You stop letting the schedule own your peace. You use time, but you're not used by it. There's a sweetness that comes from this freedom. Small things feel more alive. A sip of tea, a cool breeze, a moment of connection. These aren't filler between appointments. They are the essence of living. And the more you enter them, the more time seems to disappear. Because you, 39, no longer measuring. You, 39, re-experiencing. In this space, gratitude deepens. You stop needing more time. You feel what you have now, fully. You stop wishing to rewind. You stop waiting to fast forward. You meet life as it is. And in that meeting, the illusion of lack fades. Because there's no lack in presence. There's only what and your full attention on it. Even pain changes. Without time, suffering doesn't stretch. It arises. It moves. It passes. There's no story about how long it's lasted or how long it will last. There's just sensation, breath, space, and the less you resist it, the less it owns you. This is not detachment from life. It's engagement with it at the level of truth. You begin to live from a different place, not in delay, not in memory, but right here. Thought slows, urgency fades, even desire softens, because you're not chasing something in the next hour, the next phase, the next year. You're available, and that availability makes everything richer. Eventually, you don't need reminders to let go of time. The practice becomes part of you. You move through your day like water fluid, aware, unhurried. You still get things done, but you're not rushed. You're not grasping. You're not missing your life. Because your life is not in the future, and it's not in the past. It's not in clocks or calendars. It's not in to-do lists. It's here, right now, in this breath, in this sound, in this heartbeat. Nothing needs to be different. You let go of the timeline, and you reclaim your presence, fully, quietly, completely. And in doing so, you find the one thing you were searching for all along. Not more time, but freedom from it. And once you no longer live through the clockants, you've stopped organizing your sense of self around minutes, years, and imagined deadlines. Something deeper begins to call you. The breath is still here. The body still moves. Awareness continues to track sensation, but now a new question starts to form, quietly but persistently. Who is it that knows this moment? Who is aware of the breath? Who is seeing this body move, hearing these thoughts arise, feeling these emotions flow? There's breathing, yes. But who notices it? Who sees the noticing? This question isn't meant to be answered with words. It's not asking for a name, a label, a conclusion. It's asking for presence so direct, so intimate, that it sees through all roles. It points you toward the very root of awareness, beyond personality, beyond memory, beyond identity. It invites you not just to be present, but to look directly at what presence is, not as a concept, but as experience, unfiltered, unowned, undivided. In the beginning, awareness feels like something you do, a skill, a practice. You focus, you return, you observe. But over time, something shifts. You begin to sense that awareness is not something you create. It's something that's always been there. Even before you started paying attention, awareness was present, watching, holding, quietly allowing every experience to rise and pass. The thoughts, the breath, the sounds, the emotions, they all come and go. But what remains? What doesn't change? This is where deeper insight begins. Not just seeing thoughts, but questioning the one who sees them. Not just feeling presence, but turning attention back onto itself. There's a natural curiosity that arises here, a gentle wondering that cuts through surface-level awareness. When the breath flows in, and you know it who is knowing. When a thought appears, and you notice it, what is that which notices? You may be tempted to say me, or I, or the mind. But those are labels, pointers. They don't explain the experience. They describe it after the fact. The truth is, when you look directly at the observer, there's nothing solid to find. No shape, no boundary, just knowing, just awareness. Itself clear, open, still. It sees without effort. It doesn't push or pull. It's not distracted. It doesn't have a story. And this discovery changes something fundamental. You realize that you don't need to identify with the flow of experience, because you are not the thoughts, you are not the breath, you are not even the body. You are the space in which all of that appears, not outside of it, not separate from it, but not limited by it either. This is not a philosophical idea. It's a shift in perception, a shift that can only happen when you become quiet enough, steady enough to look. When you stop chasing clarity and just rest in the seeing, the sense of I begins to thin, not disappear in fear, but dissolve into something wider, more open, more inclusive. At first, this may feel disorienting. The mind is used to being the center. It wants to name, claim, and explain. But when you look for a fixed self within awareness, it's never there. You find thoughts, yes, feelings, memories, sensations, but no single thing you can point to and say, this is me. Everything you find is changing, and what is changing cannot be the one who sees the change. So then, what are you? The answer doesn't come in language. It comes in stillness, in resting as the witness itself, not looking for an answer, but staying with the looking. And in that looking, a deep peace begins to rise. Because you're no longer caught in content. You're resting in context. You're not the river, you're the open space in which the river flows. This isn't detachment, it's intimacy. You feel more fully, you see more clearly, but you don't cling to what arises. You don't resist what fades, because you know it's all movement, all change, all appearing in something that is not moving, and that something is your true nature. This insight can be explored through direct inquiry. You sit, you breathe, you notice the flow of experience. Then gently you ask, who is it that knows this breath? You don't look for an answer. You look for the feel of that knowing. You stay with it, again and again. Each time a thought arises, you ask, who is watching this thought? Not to analyze, but to return, to remember. What begins to reveal itself is a field of presence that holds everything without being touched by anything. It's not a blankness. It's alive, vibrant. But it doesn't grasp. It doesn't react. It simply knows. And it doesn't belong to anyone. It's not yours. It's not separate. It just is. This realization brings profound relief, because so much of human suffering comes from the illusion of being a separate self, a thinker, a doer, a struggler, isolated and trying to hold life together. But when you see through that illusion, something softens. The struggle loses its grip. You stop trying to fix every moment. You stop needing to be someone. You just are. And from that place, compassion deepens, not as a practice, but as a natural expression. When the sense of separateness dissolves, the need to defend dissolves too. You see others not as them, but as extensions of the same awareness, not conceptually, viscerally. The boundary fades. What hurts them touches you. What frees them lifts you. This experience isn't constant. The mind comes back. The story returns. But now you know. You've touched the source. And each time you remember, you can return. Not by force, but by resting, by watching, by letting go. Even daily life becomes a field of practice. When walking, ask, who is aware of this step? When speaking, feel into, what is it that hears this voice? Not as an intellectual trick, but as a doorway. A way to fall back into presence, to stop living from habit and start living from truth. Eventually, this awareness starts to shine through more often, even when you, 39, re-upset, even when you forget. There's a background knowing, a silent clarity. The more you rest in it, the more it becomes natural, stable, effortless. This is what the great teachers meant by non-duality. Not two, not self and other, not observer and observed, just awareness, aware of itself, noticing breath, noticing thought, noticing sensation, but untouched by all of it. And from here, nothing needs to be pushed away. You can allow the full range of life, grief, joy, fear, love, because it's all welcome, it's all held. You don't have to choose only the pleasant. You don't have to fix what arises, because you're no longer limited to experience. You are the open field it moves through. This realization doesn't make you passive, it makes you free. Free to act from clarity instead of fear. Free to speak from love instead of defense. Free to live from truth instead of reaction. And all of it flows from the simple practice of turning awareness back onto itself. You don't have to chase awakening. You don't have to perfect anything. You just have to look gently, look deeply, and stay with the looking. Each time you ask, who is watching this moment? And wait not for a thought, but for presence itself. You step out of the illusion. You return home, not to a self, but to the mystery that sees all selves come and go. You don't need to name it. You don't need to explain it. Just rest in it. Breathe in it. Let it show you what you are. Not a role, not a name, not even a body, but that which holds it all. Quiet, clear, alive, and always here. And once you've seen that the one watching isn't a thing, but awareness itself, ungraspable, open, silent, you might expect peace to be constant. You might think that touching the witness will dissolve all discomfort. But then a new feeling comes, flat, empty, lifeless, not pain, not fear, just dullness, a kind of stillness that feels blank. And with it comes the old question, what now? This is where many turn away, not because the practice has failed, but because it has deepened. The mind meets what it cannot entertain. No stimulation, no drama, no problem to solve. Just this, unmoving, ordinary, what people call boredom. But this is not a mistake. This is the edge. This is the invitation. Boredom arises not because there is nothing happening, but because what is happening is not what the mind wants. It wants intensity, novelty, distraction. But the present moment often doesn't offer those things. The breath is quiet, the body still, thoughts slow. And in that slowing, the mind begins to protest. It calls this dull, pointless. It tells you to check your phone, get up, change the scene. But the moment you do, you leave the doorway. Because boredom is not emptiness, it is resistance. It's the surface layer of something deeper. When you stay, when you refuse to run, that surface begins to break. And what lies beneath is rich, alive, subtle. The moment begins to open in unexpected ways, not with fireworks, but with texture, depth. You start to notice what was always there, but covered by restlessness. This is not something you can understand through theory. It must be felt. You sit, you breathe, you notice the discomfort of having nothing new. You feel the itch to move, to think, to stimulate, and instead of following it, you watch it. You let the itch rise and fall, and beneath it, you find space, a kind of quiet fullness, a presence that doesn't need anything added to it. This process trains the nervous system to stop fleeing stillness. It teaches the mind that nothing is missing. You stop associating value with excitement. You begin to see that presence doesn't have to entertain you. It just is. And the more you rest in that, the more stable you become. In this way, boredom becomes a mirror. It shows you where your attachments live. It reveals your patterns of escape, how you grasp for stimulation to avoid simply being. And when you stop feeding those patterns, they lose power. You no longer need noise to feel real. You don't need speed to feel alive. There is a humility in this, the willingness to meet the uneventful, the choice to stay when nothing special is happening. It breaks the addiction to highs. It returns you to balance. You discover that there's a kind of joy in neutrality, a soft joy, one that doesn't shout but sustains. Boredom also reveals the limits of ego. The ego thrives on doing, proving, becoming. But when you rest in stillness, there's nothing for the ego to grasp, no progress to measure, no image to polish, just presence. And that presence doesn't care what the ego wants. It asks for nothing. It waits. And in that waiting, something deeper is born. You begin to notice the fine detail of the moment, the way the light lands on the wall, the exact sound of your breath, the subtle shift in sensation as the body softens. These things were never boring. You just never looked long enough. Now you do, and they come alive. This shifts your entire relationship to experience. You no longer divide life into meaningful and meaningless. You see value in the small, in the repetition, in the quiet. Washing dishes becomes a field of practice. Waiting in line becomes a return to the body. There is nowhere you have to get to, nothing you have to fix. Even discomfort becomes interesting. You start to feel where resistance lives in the body, the tightness in the chest, the pulling behind the eyes. These sensations used to be pushed away. Now they are welcomed. You observe them with care. You breathe with them, and they shift not because you force them, but because you no longer avoid them. This is maturity, not avoiding what's dull, not needing every moment to be captivating, but staying, feeling, noticing. You start to trust life again, not as a concept, as a felt experience. You don't need to plan each second. You can let the moment unfold. You can meet what is here. This practice also changes how you relate to others. You stop needing people to entertain you. You stop seeking intensity in every connection. You learn to be with someone in silence, to listen without rushing, to share space without filling it. And in that shared stillness, intimacy deepens. You also become more creative. When the mind stops chasing stimulation, it begins to open. Insight arises from spaciousness. Clarity grows from simplicity. Ideas flow not because you push, but because you rest. Boredom becomes a reset, a clearing, a place where the next step becomes visible. In this state, the heart softens too. It no longer resists the moment. It no longer judges quiet as failure. It feels safe in stillness. And that safety spreads. It becomes your baseline. Not because you've figured everything out, but because you've stopped running. And the running was the source of suffering. You don't need to chase what's already here. You don't need to fill every gap. You start to see the gaps as sacred, the pause between words, the silence between thoughts, the empty space in a room. These are not empty. They are full of potential, full of presence, full of being. Boredom taught you that. It showed you where your fear lives. It showed you how much you grasp. It showed you how easily you leave yourself. But it also showed you how to stay, how to breathe through nothingness, how to find fullness in the quiet. And when you can do that, you are free. Because you no longer need life to perform for you. You no longer depend on outer movement for inner connection. You have touched the source, the still point, the place within you that is always enough. This doesn't mean you reject pleasure or excitement. It means you're no longer enslaved by them. You can enjoy them, but you don't need them to feel whole. You don't fear their absence. You've found something steadier, something quieter, something unshakable. And this, in truth, is the beginning of awakening. Not because you reached a peak experience, but because you stopped needing one. Not because you discovered something new, but because you stopped running from what was already here. Boredom, once feared, became your ally, your teacher, the gateway to a deeper life. A life lived from presence, a life lived from enoughness, a life not built on the highs but held by the tuple, quiet. This is where freedom begins. In the moment you stop trying to make it more and instead allow it, just as it is, quiet, simple, alive, and entirely enough. And when you no longer run from quiet, when stillness feels like home instead of absence, your awareness becomes sharper, less distracted, more available. What used to feel dull now feels alive. The body, once seen as background, becomes a field of deep discovery. Sensations are no longer boring. They become language. Breath isn't just survival, it's connection. Movement isn't random, it's meaning. In this kind of presence, the body isn't just a shape. It's the meeting point between the seen and the unseen. The body is no longer just yours. It's the earth, it's water, it's fire, it's air, it's space. Everything you touch, everything you feel, starts to speak through these elements. The body becomes a temple, not because of appearance, but because of awareness. To experience the body as the five elements is not a poetic metaphor. It's a practice that brings your attention directly into the reality of form, not just through the senses, but through the subtle understanding that all things arise from the same base elements. When you stop reducing the body to identity or appearance, you start to meet it as a process, a changing and breathing field of nature. You see that you are not separate from the wind that moves trees, the water that fills oceans, the fire that warms the sun, the ground beneath your feet, or the vastness that holds it all. The element of earth shows itself as solidity, the weight in your bones, the strength of your spine, the firmness of your muscles. It's what holds you upright when everything else feels unstable. When you bring awareness to the sensation of sitting or lying down, you feel this earth quality stable, grounded, unmoving. You notice the points where your body touches the floor or the chair. You feel into the density of the physical form, the way it supports you without effort. Practicing with earth is learning to root your awareness in the present by resting in physical stability. You realize that even when the mind moves, the ground holds you. Water reveals itself through fluidity, blood moving through veins, saliva moistening the mouth, tears rising and falling, sweat forming on the skin. Inside the body, water moves without pause. It lubricates, carries, cools, and connects. When you pay attention to the feeling of fluidity, whether in the breath, in movement, or in emotion, you begin to trust the flow of experience. You don't have to hold everything still. You let the moment move through, like water passing through a stream. When emotion rises, you feel it as movement, not as identity. It's not, "I am sad." Its sadness is moving through the water of the body. This shift creates freedom. Fire is the heat that sustains. Its body temperature, digestion, transformation. It lives in your belly, your chest, the warmth of your hands. It fuels life without needing to be seen. You can sit and feel the quiet heat inside you, the warmth of breath in the nostrils, the energy in the heart space. Fire is also linked to clarity. It burns away what is false. When your awareness tunes into fire, you start to recognize where energy is blocked or where it burns too bright. The practice is balance, noticing the quality of heat without suppressing or inflaming it. Fire becomes a teacher of power without aggression, warmth without force. Air is movement. In the breath, in the expansion of the lungs, in the beating of the heart. It animates without form. You don't see it, but you feel it in every inhale, every exhale. The lightness in your arms when you stretch. The spaciousness in your chest when you let go. When you sit with the air element, you start to notice how much happens effortlessly. The breath breathes itself. The chest rises and falls on its own. You learn to trust life's rhythms. You let air teach you how to be carried without control. It shows you that lightness doesn't mean detachment. It means presence without weight. Then there is space, often the most overlooked. It's not what you feel, it's what holds everything you feel. It's the gap between thoughts, the openness inside the joints, the quiet between sounds. Without space, nothing else could arise. When you practice with space, you tune into the places where nothing is happening, and yet everything is possible. Space is not absence, it's potential. It allows the body to move, the breath to flow, the mind to rest. When you meditate on space, you start to see how it surrounds and permeates everything. The body is not separate from the space it moves through, it's shaped by it. When all 5 elements are seen clearly, you no longer feel solid in the way you used to. You don't hold on so tightly to the idea of being one thing, one body, one identity. You feel the changing nature of form, how the body is not a fixed object, but a dance of elements, rising, passing, shifting, blending. This brings a kind of softness. You start to care for the body, not from vanity, but from reverence. Not to control it, but to listen to it. You begin to eat with attention to earth, drink with awareness of water, rest in the warmth of fire, breathe with the ease of air, move with the openness of space. Daily life becomes a practice, not through effort, but through recognition. The body teaches you without speaking. It tells you when to rest, when to move, when to open. You start to trust that inner knowing. Pain is also transformed in this practice. Rather than seeing pain as a problem, you see it as imbalance. among elements. Too much heat, too little flow, blocked air, compressed space. You listen with awareness, not panic. You ask, which element needs attention? And rather than fighting pain, you respond with care. The body becomes a dialogue, not a battleground. There is a deep grounding that comes with this way of being. The body is no longer just something you carry. It becomes a guide, a compass. Even stillness feels like motion when you listen this closely. The smallest shift in posture, the subtlest inhale, all carry wisdom. You learn to stay present, not by pushing thoughts away, but by resting fully in the sensations that are always here. And this awareness expands. When you walk, you feel the earth beneath your feet. When you shower, you feel water cleanse more than the skin. When you sit in sunlight, you receive the fire that grows food and warms bones. When wind touches your face, it reminds you that breath moves through all things. When you close your eyes, you feel held by space itself. Life is not separate from practice. The body is not separate from the world. This way of seeing changes how you relate to others, too. You no longer meet people as fixed roles or ideas. You see their elements. You sense their earth, how they hold themselves. Their water, how emotion moves in their voice. Their fire, the energy behind their eyes. Their air, the rhythm of their breath. Their space, the presence they offer, the silence they hold. Every encounter becomes richer. Less about control, more about communion. And the more you live in this elemental awareness, the less fear holds you. Fear often comes from the illusion that you are small, alone, solid, and separate. But when you feel your being as part of wind, heat, ground, and space, you start to know yourself differently. Not as a name, but as nature. Not as an identity, but as movement. You stop trying to fix life. You let it flow through you. This isn't about escaping the body. It's about fully arriving in it. The breath becomes more than breath. The body becomes more than body. It becomes a living field of presence, woven from the same elements that shape the stars, the oceans, the forests, and the sky. And once you know this not as belief, but as lived truth, you never feel quite as separate again. You rest in the body, not with fear, but with awe. Not to hold on, but to witness. You know that this form will change, but what moves through it, earth, water, fire, air, space, will never stop dancing. And your presence is that dance. Steady, awake, here, always here. And after sensing the body not as flesh but as earth, water, fire, air, and space, you begin to see something even more subtle. Beneath sensation, beneath elements, there's something else taking form, shape. It moves quietly. It builds without noise. It forms the idea of who you are. It takes moments and turns them into identity. It takes reactions and turns them into personality. It takes habits and calls them you. This process happens so quickly, so invisibly, that it feels natural. But it's not fixed. It's not solid. The sense of I is not a constant. It's being made over and over in each experience. And the more clearly you see this, the more space opens around who you think you are. The self feels real because it feels familiar. It seems to be the one who remembers, who plans, who makes choices. But when you bring careful attention to your experience, what you find is not one thing. You find shifting parts, thoughts that come and go, emotions that rise and fall, preferences that change. With time, place, and energy, you find habits that feel personal but were learned, views that seem permanent but were borrowed, sensations that feel central but are in constant motion. So, where is the self? When you sit with this question not to solve it, but to observe it, awareness sharpens. You begin to catch the moment when thought arises and says, "This is happening to me." You begin to notice how quickly an opinion becomes an identity, how one experience becomes a label. There is the pain in the pain body, and then the thought, "I am someone who suffers." There is a mistake at work, and then the story, "I am incompetent." These stories get built fast, not maliciously, but habitually. That is mind making. Mind making is not evil, it is natural. It is how the mind organizes experience. But problems begin when we cling to what's built, when we believe the structure is the truth, when we forget it's just a temporary formation. You can begin to unhook from that grip by watching the building process in real time. You notice the sensation, you notice the reaction, you notice the thought, you notice the identification. And somewhere in that chain, you interrupt the momentum. You don't stop the mind, but you see it more clearly. The core of this practice is mindfulness of fabrication, the understanding that thoughts are not just random, they are shaped by causes. They arise based on past experience, mood, belief, conditioning, memory, expectation, and they influence each other. One thought gives rise to another. One feeling fuels a narrative. One narrative creates a role. And suddenly, the mind has built a self. But when you witness it being built, it becomes easier to let it fall apart. You do not have to fight the self. You only need to see how it's made. For example, a critical voice arises. You hear it. It says, "You always fail." If you identify with it, you suffer. But if you pause and say, "This is just a thought shaped by an old fear," something loosens. The thought loses authority. It's not suppressed. It's not denied. But it's not you. This kind of awareness can be uncomfortable at first, because identity often brings safety, even painful. Identities can feel stable. They offer predictability. But they also limit you. They filter every experience through a fixed lens. They tell you how to feel, what to avoid, what to believe. When you begin to step back from identity, you don't become less human. You become more alive, more flexible, more responsive to what's actually here, instead of what your role tells you should be here. Moment-to-moment self-making also shows up in interactions. You play the confident one, the smart one, the broken one, the strong one. You play roles depending on the room, the people, the history. But those roles shift. You are not one fixed version of yourself. You are many masks arising in different conditions. And when you see that clearly, you don't have to defend them. You don't have to maintain a consistent performance. You just show up, present, attuned, unfixed. The body helps with this practice. Sensation is real. You can anchor in it. When identity feels strong, drop into sensation. What does it feel like in the body to be the one who is angry? Where is it located? What is its shape, its temperature, its movement? Watch it closely. You'll notice it changes. The longer you observe, the less personal it becomes. It's not your anger. It's anger moving through awareness. This shift in view allows it to rise and pass without clinging. Emotions, too, lose their grip when seen as impersonal processes. Not, "I am anxious," but anxiety is arising. Not, "I am ashamed," but shame is present. This simple language change reflects a deeper truth, that feelings are not proof of identity, they are passing weather. When seen clearly, they do not stick, they come, they teach, they leave. Thoughts are the fastest builders of identity. They are convincing, they sound like truth, but when watched, they reveal their nature. Each thought arises based on a condition. No thought is permanent. They shift with your environment, your blood sugar, your mood. So how can they define you? They can't, unless you let them. The mind also builds self around memory. You remember what you did, what was said, what you regret. And then you shape a self around it. I am someone who always. But memory is fragile. It changes. It's selective. It's shaped by what you feel today. So it cannot be the foundation of your truth. What you remember is not wrong, but it's not solid. And you don't have to carry it as identity. Even the idea of progress can become a trap. You start to identify as someone on a path, someone who is healing, someone who is growing. These are useful as temporary guides, but they too can become prisons if clung to. They create expectations, they create pressure, they create comparison. Let them serve you without defining you. Non-identification does not mean disconnection. It means intimacy without clinging. You feel what arises. You respond, but you don't build a self out of it. You return to presence. You meet the next moment fresh. You stay curious. This is freedom. When you understand mind-making, you also understand that others are building themselves too, that their reactions are shaped, that their words are often projections. This creates compassion. You don't have to take everything personally. You don't have to believe every label. You see their struggle to hold their own identities together, and you soften. All of this deepens your trust in awareness itself, because awareness doesn't need a self to function. It doesn't need a story to be clear. It simply knows. It simply holds. You learn to rest in that clarity, not lost in the roles, not fused with the voice, just seeing, just being. Over time, the need to define yourself fades. You stop needing to be seen in a certain way. You stop chasing consistency. You allow change. You allow contradiction. You allow newness. This doesn't make you confused. It makes you whole. You begin to live from presence, not personality. You speak with less defense. You act with more sincerity. You respond instead of reacting. And when old identities arise, you see them as habits, not as truths. You thank them for their service, and you return to what is real now. This practice doesn't make you disappear. It reveals what's always been underneath the performance. A quiet awareness, a steady openness, a presence that does not need to prove itself, that does not need to be one thing, that is not limited by any story. In this presence, you find ease, because you no longer have to hold anything together. You don't need to be someone. You don't need to fix your image. You just need to be here, awake, attentive, alive. And here, in this simple knowing, you are not less. You are more than any name, any thought, any history. You are not the one who watches. You are the watching itself. Clear, unmade, unbroken, and completely free. And once you've seen that the self is not a fixed thing, that it is shaped by moments and dissolved by awareness, what rises next is a quiet responsibility, not from fear, not from guilt, but from clarity. If there is no solid self, then each moment becomes a choice, not about becoming someone, but about how you meet what's here, how you act when no one is watching, how you respond when the moment is too small to be seen. These tiny movements matter, not because they build identity, but because they ripple. Each choice is a seed. Each thought, each word, each pause plants something in your inner world. And over time, these seeds become your life. This is karma, not in a distant, dramatic sense, but in its most immediate and intimate form. Karma as cause and effect, as attention and outcome, as subtle shaping. It's not reserved for the big decisions. It's happening in the smallest gestures, the glance you give when annoyed, the tone you use when you're tired, the honesty in your response when the truth is inconvenient. These moments build momentum. They create patterns. They shape how the next moment feels. Most people think of karma as something that happens to them, but in truth, karma is something we are always creating, not through one grand act, but through countless unnoticed moments. The way you answer a stranger, whether you return a message, whether you interrupt, whether you listen. These choices seem small, but they leave impressions on your mind, on your heart, on your nervous system. The more present you are, the more visible this becomes. Awareness sharpens your ability to feel consequence. You notice the heaviness that comes after speaking from irritation. You sense the peace that follows a kind word. These effects don't wait years to return. They show up in your body, in your energy, in your sleep, in your breath. Karma isn't distant, it's immediate. Presence also makes you sensitive to intention. The same action can carry very different karmic weight, depending on what fuels it. You can speak kindly to manipulate, or from care. You can give out of guilt, or out of generosity. You can be silent to punish, or to hold space. Awareness shows you the difference. It helps you see where your actions are clean and where they are tangled. This clarity begins in the mind. Every decision starts as a thought, and thoughts are shaped by attention. What you dwell on matters. The stories you repeat matter. If you habitually judge, that judgment becomes your lens. If you habitually soften, that softness becomes your posture. So the first ethical choice is often internal. Which thought do you follow? Then come your words. Speech is powerful not because it is loud, but because it carries energy. A careless phrase can echo for days. A single kind sentence can shift a whole interaction. You don't need to be perfect, but you need to be present. To speak with care is to feel the weight of your words before they land, to pause when heat rises, to choose truth without cruelty. This doesn't mean silence. It means responsibility. It means speaking in a way that adds clarity instead of confusion. Action, too, carries layers of intention. Not just what you do, but how you do it. Washing dishes with resentment leaves a residue. Doing it with gratitude becomes a practice. Picking up a piece of trash without being asked, helping someone without seeking praise, these are not minor acts. They shape your mind. They plant seeds of generosity, humility, integrity. Over time, these qualities grow strong. Presence helps you notice the moments where you drift from your values, when you speak just to be liked, when you exaggerate to sound impressive, when you avoid discomfort by lying. These are not sins, they're habits. But they create friction. They divide you from yourself. And with awareness, you can catch them early, not to punish, but to realign. Ethical living is not a moral burden. It is an act of remembering what kind of energy you want to carry, what kind of ripple you want to leave. It's easy to be kind when it's convenient. The deeper practice is kindness when it's not, honesty when it costs you, silence when your ego wants noise, generosity when you feel empty. Each of these choices, when made with presence, becomes a form of purification. They clear the mind. They lighten the heart. They restore balance. Karma is not just what binds you, it's also what frees you. Each conscious act becomes a path back to alignment. The body becomes a guide in this practice. It responds to truth. It relaxes in sincerity. It tightens in deceit. It contracts when you betray your values. It softens when you act from integrity. You don't need a rule book. You need to listen. The wisdom is already there. You've felt it every time you've said something that didn't sit right. Every time you've held back when you knew it was right to act. The tension is feedback. The clarity is feedback. Living this way builds confidence, in not the kind that needs approval, but the kind that comes from congruence. You trust yourself because you know you're acting with awareness, not perfectly, but sincerely. You know that your actions match your values, that your energy is not polluted by hidden motives. This trust is subtle, but it's strong. It gives you stability when life becomes unclear. Invisible karma also shows up in how you treat your own mind. Do you shame yourself for slipping? Do you push past fatigue? Do you speak to yourself with cruelty? These choices matter too. Compassion toward yourself is not indulgent. It is karmic wisdom, because the way you treat yourself becomes the way you treat others. Harshness radiates outward, so does kindness. Even your attention is a form of karma. What you choose to focus on, resentment or gratitude, criticism or beauty, shapes the quality of your life. The object of your attention doesn't just reflect your mind, it creates it. You become what you contemplate. And so choosing presence again and again is not a luxury. It's a discipline, a devotion, a vow to meet life with clarity and care. This practice is not about control, it's about sensitivity, feeling the impact of your choices, refining your awareness, letting your behavior arise from connection instead of reactivity. It's not about being good. It's about being awake. And the more awake you become, the more subtle the practice gets. You start to feel karma, not as a rule, but as a field, a living feedback loop. Every action, every thought, every pause either adds harmony or adds noise. This isn't punishment, it's reflection. The world responds to how you show up, and when you show up with presence, with care, with integrity, the response shifts. Maybe not immediately, but inevitably. You start to see ethics not as rules to follow, but as a form of beauty, a way of walking in the world that leaves fewer bruises, that creates more space, that heals instead of harms. And the more you live this way, the more natural it feels. Not because it's easy, but because it's true. You begin to value the small, the moments where no one's watching, the decisions that seem to carry no weight. You know now that these are the real practice, that how you act when it doesn't matter is what shapes who you become when it does. Presence sharpens this sensitivity. It makes the invisible visible. It lets you feel the consequence of your inner world. Not to judge, but to learn. Not to freeze, but to choose with more care. This is how you shape your path, not by waiting for the big moment, but by meeting each small one with intention, each gesture with clarity, each breath with attention. This is how invisible karma becomes a visible life, one grounded in presence, one guided by care, One, built not on noise, but on the quiet power of conscious choice. And in the end, that choice is always here, right now, waiting for your attention, ready to shape the next breath, the next word, the next step. And after learning how the smallest choices carry quiet weight, how each unnoticed act shapes the probabilities, tone of your life, you begin to see something even more subtle. It's not just what you say or do that matters. It's when you choose to pay attention, not just in the middle of something, but in the space before and after, not just during the event, but in the moments that surround it. These in-between spaces are easy to miss, but they're where most of life actually happens. They're not destinations. They're crossings, shifts, thresholds. They don't ask for effort. They ask for awareness. You don't always realize how much you rush through the transitions, the pause between waking and moving, the seconds between opening a door and walking in, the moment before you speak, the few steps it takes to leave one room and enter another, the silence before a message is answered. These are not gaps. They are living moments, alive with possibility, but they pass unnoticed if you aren't watching. This is where the liminal mind comes in, the mind that knows how to dwell in the middle, that doesn't treat transitions as dead space, but as sacred. That learns to soften in the pauses instead of skipping over them. Presence in these moments creates a new kind of rhythm, one that's not driven by urgency, but shaped by attention. And once you begin to live this way, something shifts in your nervous system. It learns to stop chasing. It learns to rest in motion. When you wake in the morning, the first seconds before your thoughts form are not meaningless. They hold the tone for your entire day. If you meet them with awareness, with breath, with softness, the day begins differently, not from tension, but from space. You don't need a perfect routine. You need presence in the first inhale, in the feeling of sheets, in the way light enters the room. These are not distractions from your day. They are your day. The same goes for falling asleep. That drifting between waking and sleeping is not just a descent, it's a release, a letting go, a place where all the roles drop away. And if you meet that edge with care, sleep comes with more peace. The mind doesn't need to be dragged down, it just needs to be allowed to soften, to not hold, to not rehearse. The breath becomes the bridge. Following it gently lets the body surrender. Letting go becomes natural when it's done from presence. Throughout your day, liminal moments continue to appear. Walking from one task to another, waiting for a call to connect, sitting in a parked car before stepping out. These moments are invitations. You can fill them with distraction, or you can use them as doors into awareness. Touch into your breath. Feel your feet on the ground. Listen to the sounds around you. These are not techniques to make time pass. They are ways to inhabit time more fully. Transitions are not just about movement. They're about shifts in attention, moving from one emotional state to another, from rest to activity, from solitude to interaction. Each shift has its own tone, its own energy. When you rush past it, you bring the last moment into the next one without awareness. You carry the tension of your last thought into your next word. But if you pause just for a breath, you let the slate clear. You allow space for something new to emerge. This practice also reveals the subtle ways your mind resists the in-between. It wants to arrive, to land, to know. But life is mostly made of transitions. You're always becoming, always shifting, and the refusal to feel that motion creates pressure. When you anchor into the transition, you no longer need to be somewhere else. You meet the unfolding with openness. Even physically, transitions shape your state. The way you get out of bed, the way you walk into your home, the way you close a laptop before dinner, each of these carries energy. And when you meet them with presence, they become rituals, not grand, just honest, just attentive. You mark the ending. You meet the beginning. You don't blur them, you feel them. This kind of presence doesn't slow you down, it stabilizes you. You start to feel more at ease, even when things are moving, because you're not chasing arrival, you're rooted in process. Each moment becomes enough, not because it's dramatic, but because you're in it, fully. Transitions also hold emotional truth. Often what you avoid in these spaces is not time eats feeling, that quiet anxiety before an event, that sadness after saying goodbye, that fear before a choice. These emotions live in the gaps. And when you stop skipping over them, you learn to meet your own heart. Not as a problem, but as a companion. You feel what you've been avoiding, and it loses its grip. In relationships, this awareness brings softness. The pause before you reply, the breath before you react, the moment before you enter a room. These are where connection lives. Not in the words, but in the space around them. When you meet these edges with presence, you bring care. You don't rush to fill the silence. You don't speak from habit. You respond from truth. In practice, this might look like letting the next moment come without pulling it. Waiting for your body to move instead of forcing it. Letting your breath guide the shift. Touching back into your senses. These are not instructions to follow. They are invitations to feel. The more you feel, the more life opens. These spaces also hold the potential for reflection, not analysis, but insight. Clarity doesn't always come in the middle of a task. It comes when you step between tasks, when the noise softens, when you're not trying to figure anything out. Ideas surface not because you searched for them, but because you made room. The mind learns from these spaces. It learns how not to rush, how not to grip. It becomes more fluid, more balanced. You become someone who doesn't need constant certainty. You become comfortable with becoming. This changes how you show up. You don't panic in pauses. You don't avoid the unknown. You stay. Staying in transitions is not about doing more. It's about sensing more, letting yourself be touched by each moment without needing to label it. You notice how light changes throughout the day, how your breath shifts when you're tired, how your thoughts soften when you stop trying to solve everything. These are not small details, they are your life lived fully. When you practice in the in-between, you build resilience. You learn how to reset in seconds, how to return to presence in the middle of motion. You stop waiting for perfect conditions. Every threshold becomes a chance to reconnect. You don't need silence to be still. You don't need stillness to be awake. Over time, the mind begins to trust these pauses. They stop feeling empty. They start to feel full. You begin to crave them, not for escape, but for realness. You no longer need to rush through them to get to the real part. You know this is it. Right now, this breath, this shift, this moment before the next. And when life changes as it always does, you are not thrown, because you've trained in the dim transitions. You've learned how to meet change with grace. You've practiced presence not just when things are steady, but when they move. You've stopped needing to land before you can feel safe. You realized safety is not in certainty, it's in awareness. This is the heart of the liminal mind, a mind that moves but doesn't scatter, a mind that waits but doesn't stall, a mind that touches each edge with openness, that treats every passage not as something to get through, but as something to feel. And in that feeling, transformation happens, quietly, naturally, completely, without effort, without rush, with full, simple attention, now. And when you've learned to stay with transitions, not to rush them, not to escape them, you begin to notice something deeper hiding inside each shift. Underneath every pause, between each breath, just before a word arrives or after one leaves, there's something else. It's not silence in the way people usually mean. It's not a lack. It's not a break. It's awareness itself, untouched by the mind's movement. It's not what you think. It's what remains when thought falls away. It's not content. It's clarity. And in that clarity, something quietly astonishing reveals itself. You are not your thinking. You are not the stream of noise. You are the space in which it moves. This space isn't far. It's not hidden. It's always here. But it gets overlooked because the mind is trained to chase content, to follow each thought as if it matters more than stillness, as if the story is more real than the awareness watching it. Most people live in a constant stream of thought. One idea leads to the next, then the next, in an endless chain. But the truth is, the mind doesn't flow without pause. There are gaps, short ones, barely noticeable unless you're still, but they're there. A moment after one thought ends and before the next begins, a soft, quiet openness. And that's where awareness waits, not lost in the thinking, but completely awake between it. This is not about stopping thoughts. The mind was never the problem. Thinking is not your enemy. It's the attachment to thinking that creates suffering, the belief that you are the voice in your head, the habit of following every idea as if it defines you. But thoughts are like clouds. They come and go. You are the sky. You are the space. You are not what passes through. You are what stays. Becoming the space between thoughts is not an idea. It's a shift in attention. It's a different way of being. With the mind, you start by noticing the thought. You hear it rise. You feel it play out. Then you notice it fade. And there is the moment. No words, no sound, just being, no explanation, just presence. The more you rest in this space, the more it reveals itself. At first, the gaps are brief, tiny pauses, a breath of stillness. But if you don't rush past them, they open. And they're not empty. They're alive, vibrant, awake. You feel it in the body, a softening, a widening. The edges of your identity begin to loosen. You're not the one narrating the moment. You're the one seeing it unfold. This practice begins with observation. You sit quietly. You watch the mind. You don't try to stop the stream. You don't try to force silence. You let thoughts rise. You let them fall. But you stop clinging to their story. You stop giving each one your full attention. You learn to rest just behind them, noticing the content, but anchored in the space. This is where peace begins, not by changing your mind, but by unhooking from it. You stop needing to finish every sentence. You stop following every memory. You stop solving every problem that appears. You see the movement, but you are no longer inside it. You are no longer pulled. Thoughts can still come, but they don't carry you away. You become the witness, not the participant. And that witness is not a person. It's not another thought. It's awareness itself, wordless, still, open. In this space, you find relief. Not because the world has stopped, but because you're no longer lost in the commentary. There is nothing missing in the gap. In fact, the gap is where everything becomes clear. It's where creativity rises, where understanding blooms. It's where truth lives, not the truth you can explain, but the kind that feels unshakable, quiet, certain, free from proof. This presence is deeper than focus. Focus narrows, presence opens. Focus holds a target, presence holds everything. When you rest in the space between thoughts, you stop narrowing your life down to goals and problems. You start seeing it as it is. You start living from stillness, not reaction. This practice doesn't require effort. It requires interest. You learn to be curious about the space, not just the sound. You listen not just to the words in your mind, but to the silence underneath them. You don't strain to stay there. You simply stop leaving. Over time, something inside you begins to shift. You start identifying less with your thinking. You feel less defensive, less reactive, less rushed. Not because you've fixed your thoughts, but because you've stopped being ruled by them. They still come, but they don't control your state. They don't shape your worth. They don't tell you who you are. You also begin to see how much thought is unnecessary, how much of it loops, repeats, rehearses. You don't stop it by force. You just stop giving it energy. You rest in the space, and the noise starts to fade on its own. You notice how peace isn't far. It's not waiting for you to finish thinking. It's waiting for you to stop chasing thought. Peace lives in the pause, in the inhale before the next idea, in the quiet beneath all the motion. It was never hidden. It was just drowned out by habit. This presence also brings clarity. When you're no longer pulled by every opinion, you start to hear what's true, not loud truth, subtle truth, the kind that doesn't argue, the kind that doesn't panic, the kind that was always there, just waiting for a break in the noise. Becoming the space between thoughts doesn't mean you stop functioning. You still think, you still plan, but you don't build identity around it. You don't lose yourself in the narrative. You think when thinking is needed, and when it's not, you rest. You return to stillness. You don't rush to fill the gap. This balance creates a different kind of mind, a mind that's not overrun, a mind that listens, a mind that doesn't mistake motion for meaning. You become someone who can sit with discomfort without trying to explain it away. Someone who can hear another without immediately forming a reply. Someone who doesn't need to react because silence no longer feels threatening. This space becomes a refuge, not because you've escaped life, but because you've remembered what's underneath it. The stillness that doesn't collapse when things get hard. The awareness that doesn't leave when emotion rises. The clarity that doesn't depend on control. It's also where compassion grows. When you're not tangled in your own thoughts, you can feel others more clearly. You hear what's beneath their words. You sense the pause they're afraid to take. You hold space without needing to fill it. Your presence becomes a kind of mirror, calm, open, reflective. And when things get loud again, as they will, you don't panic. You don't feel lost. You remember the space. You remember how to return, with breath, with attention, with surrender. This practice doesn't ask for perfection. It asks for presence. Not all the time, just now, just this moment, just the willingness to be with what's here and then to rest in what holds it. And that resting is not passive. It's the most alive place you can be. It's where your energy is no longer scattered. It's where your heart becomes steady. It's where awareness stops clinging to stories and begins to live in truth. In the space between thoughts, you find yourself. Not the self you've imagined, not the one you've constructed, but the one who's always been here, watching, listening, unmoving, whole, not because of what you think, but because of what you are. Presence, spaciousness, awareness itself, quiet, unchanging, and completely free. And once you've rested in the space between thoughts, noticing how stillness is not something you create but something you uncover, another layer of attention becomes available. Presence starts to reveal itself not only in what is quiet, but in what is always around you. The world keeps speaking, not in language, but in sound. Everyday sounds, the ones you overlook or try to block out, become openings. They are not distractions, they are invitations. Listening becomes more than hearing. It becomes a path to now. Most people wait for silence to feel still. They assume that peace only comes when the noise ends. But real stillness doesn't depend on silence. It lives inside whatever is here, even if what's here is sound. The hum of a refrigerator, the barking of a dog, a passing car. These are not in the way. They are the way. Not because they're meaningful, but because they're real, present, unfiltered. Sound always comes in the present moment. It cannot echo from the past or be predicted from the future. When you hear clearly, you're anchored in now. This practice begins with shifting the way you relate to sound. Instead of pushing it away or labeling it, you meet it directly, without resistance, without narrative. You notice the texture, the rhythm, the volume. You don't try to make it stop. You let it move through you. This softening of resistance is powerful, because most suffering doesn't come from sound itself. It comes from the mental story about the sound, from the judgment, the frustration, the tightening. Listening with presence is a kind of surrender, not giving up, but giving space, letting the world be what it is without needing to control it. You hear the sound, and you hear your reaction to it. You listen to both. This dual attention creates depth. The sound is not separate from your awareness, it's part of it. You don't absorb it or block it. You let it float in the same field as your breath, your body, your thoughts. It doesn't dominate, it coexists. At first, you might notice discomfort. The mind may say, "This is annoying. This is too loud. I can't focus." But if you don't follow those thoughts, if you stay with the raw sound, something changes. The judgment softens. The sensation becomes interesting. You stop needing the world to be quiet for your mind to rest. This is freedom. Using sound as practice means bringing mindfulness to the ears, not straining, but relaxing into hearing. You let awareness land gently on the unfolding of noise. You notice when something begins, how it sustains, how it fades. You hear the pauses between sounds, the spaces that give them meaning. This way of listening is not about finding special sounds. It's about meeting what's already here with open attention. This attention reveals how layered your soundscape really is. You begin to hear sounds you once ignored. The faint ticking of a clock, the rustle of leaves, the whisper of your own breath. These details don't distract you from presence, they deepen it. They show you that life is always happening, always alive, even in moments you thought were empty. There's also a beauty in listening without labels. When you stop naming what you hear, you experience it more fully. The sound of water is not just water. It becomes sensation, motion, tone. You let it wash through you without needing to define it. This opens a different kind of intimacy with the world. One that's direct, without concept. Presence in sound also reveals the body. You start to feel how sound vibrates through your chest, your arms, your spine. You hear not just with your ears, but with your whole being. This deepens your connection to experience. You're not just hearing sounds, you're part of the field in which they arise. There's no separation. When you practice this way, the need for silence fades. You stop waiting for ideal conditions. You stop needing the world to quiet down. You realize that peace isn't the absence of sound, it's the absence of resistance. And when you live that way, every moment becomes available. Not just the calm ones, not just the quiet ones, all of them. Listening also trains patience. Sound comes and goes at its own pace. You can't rush a bell to fade faster. You can't stop a siren mid-tone. So you wait, you breathe, you allow. This teaches the mind to soften its grip, to stop insisting, to stop controlling. You meet life as it is, not as you wish it to be. Sound becomes a teacher of impermanence. Each tone rises and passes, nothing stays. Even the loudest noise fades. You begin to trust this, not conceptually, but through direct experience. This trust calms the nervous system. You stop fearing intensity. You know it will move through. There's a unique clarity in this kind of listening, not because sound explains anything, but because it clears the mind's obsession with thought. Sound doesn't ask for belief, it just is. When you rest in it, the thinking slows, awareness sharpens. You become less involved with mental noise and more attuned to what's happening now. This practice can be done anywhere, while walking, while working, while sitting. You don't need a special space. You just bring your attention to what's already unfolding, the hum of the street, the murmur of voices, the clicking of keys. None of these are interruptions. They are invitations. Over time, this presence in sound begins to change your inner world. You become more sensitive to subtlety. You notice when your body tightens in response to a sound. You notice when it softens. You hear your own voice differently. The way you speak becomes part of the practice. You speak slower, with more care, with more listening built in. In relationships, this changes everything. You listen not just to words, but to the energy behind them. You hear tone, you hear silence, you stop filling gaps with your own noise. You wait. You let others unfold. This creates connection without force, presence without performance. Even difficult sounds become workable. A baby crying, a loud neighbor, a ringing phone. You don't need to enjoy them, but you can stay with them. You can feel their edge without pushing them away. This builds emotional strength, not from suppression, but from willingness. You start to hear more of life, not just in the beautiful sounds, but in the ordinary ones. You hear time pass. You hear the world breathe. And in that hearing, you stop being separate. You stop living in your head. You return to the rhythm that's always been here. Presence in sound is not about tuning out. It's about tuning in, not to thought, but to sensation, to vibration, to experience without story. This kind of attention doesn't narrow your world, it expands it. You realize that everything speaks. The world is not silent, it's singing. The only question is whether you're listening. And once you begin listening this way, not with judgment, but with openness, you hear more than sound. You hear the present moment, the echo of now, not as a concept, but as a felt experience. Right here, right now, alive, complete, unfolding, and entirely enough. And once you've begun to hear the world, not as noise but as presence once, every sound becomes a reminder that now is always happening. You start to sense what's been calling you from underneath it. There's a pull, subtle but constant, to return to something older than language, older than thought, older than cities and plans and structure. A longing not just to be present, but to feel what it means to be alive in the rawest, most grounded way, not in theory, but in earth, in breath, in wind, in space, untouched by control. This is where presence deepens, not through more ideas, but through less, through returning to the original teacher, the living world. Before techniques, before doctrines, before temples of stone, there were trees, there were rivers, caves, night air, animal calls, sky without ceiling. Early Buddhist monks knew this. They didn't just meditate in nature, they meditated with it. Forests were not just backdrops, they were co-practitioners. Silence wasn't the absence of speech, it was the sound of wind through bamboo, the creaking of branches, the rhythm of rain. To them, wildness wasn't chaos, it was a mirror. It showed them what was real, what remained when the mind stopped reaching. The practice of rewilding awareness begins with remembering that the body is not separate from nature. The same rhythms that guide the seasons guide your breath, the same cycles that move the moon move your blood. You are not visiting the natural world, you are made of it. But modern life trains you to forget. It walls you off. It replaces earth with floor, stars with screens, stillness with noise. And presence becomes thin, abstract, disconnected from the roots. To rewild awareness is not to escape civilization. It's to dissolve the illusion that you were ever apart from the living world. The forest doesn't ask you to change, it asks you to notice, to slow, to feel the weight of your body on soil, to hear the difference between stillness and silence, to be seen by the sky without needing to explain anything. It's a remembering, not a learning. When monks entered the forest, they did so not to find something but to let go of everything extra. They watched how their minds clung to comfort, how fear rose in the dark, how silence revealed things they couldn't hear in crowded spaces. These challenges were not problems, they were the teaching. They showed them where the edges of identity lived. And when those edges softened, something else emerged, a quiet intimacy with being. No audience, no agenda, just presence, vast and undivided. Nature has no interest in your performance. It doesn't care about your plans, your fears, your self-image. It just is, fully, without needing approval. And the more time you spend with it, the more you begin to match its rhythm. You breathe deeper, you stop rushing, you listen more, not because you tried, but because your system remembers. It remembers how to be without effort. The ground itself can become your teacher. Sitting on earth changes something. The body relaxes. The nervous system quiets. There's a kind of trust that returns. Not trust in outcomes, but trust in support. The ground holds you. It has always held you. And when you feel that not as a thought, but as a fact, you stop trying to carry everything alone. Air in wild places feels different. It's not just clean, it's alive. You breathe it and feel space return inside. You, not because the world has changed, but because you've stopped resisting it. The forest doesn't ask you to think less. It gives you enough stillness that the thoughts soften on their own. Light becomes a kind of practice. You begin to notice how it shifts without needing to be controlled. Morning light through trees, golden hours that hold silence differently, darkness that teaches you how to feel without seeing, These rhythms are not exotic, they are deeply human. You were meant to feel them. You were built to respond to them. When you walk through nature with attention, presence becomes natural. Each step becomes real. The way your foot meets earth, the sound of leaves under heel, the coolness of shade, the texture of bark, the pause before a bird takes flight. These are not background events. They are what life feels like when you stop thinking about it. The early monks practiced walking meditation not on marble paths, but on dirt trails. Their awareness was tuned not just to breath, but to the world moving around them. They didn't use nature to feel spiritual. They entered it to stop pretending. There was nothing to prove in the forest, nothing to master, only the ongoing act of meeting life as it is. This presence teaches humility. You are not in charge of the wind. You can't command the rain. You don't choose when the moon is full. These realities break the illusion of control, but they don't leave you powerless. They remind you how to surrender, not as defeat, but as alignment. You begin to sense the body differently too, not as an object, but as process, as part of something larger. You notice the temperature of your skin shift with sun and shadow. You feel how breath responds to elevation, to moisture, to scent. The body is not a closed system. It's porous. It responds to the world because it is of the world. In wild places, the mind doesn't disappear. It reveals itself more clearly. You begin to see your mental habits more honestly. Your need to name, to categorize, to judge. You notice how quickly the mind wants to turn experience into story, and in that noticing, you're given a choice to continue the story or to rest in the sensing. Early monastics didn't avoid fear. They sat with it, in caves at night, with animals nearby, with sounds they couldn't name. This wasn't punishment, it was freedom, not because fear vanished, but because their relationship with it changed. They stopped needing to escape it. They learned to watch it rise, move, and pass, just like wind, just like thought, just like breath. This kind of awareness doesn't need structure, it doesn't need rituals, it only needs attention, honest, open, consistent attention. Nature doesn't perform for you, and when you stop performing back, something deep relaxes. You stop needing to be good at being present. You just are, as you are. Practicing this way opens your sense of time. Nature doesn't rush. It doesn't multitask. It doesn't need to optimize. It shows you that presence unfolds in layers, that the longer you stay, the more you feel. The more you feel, the less you need to fix. The less you fix, the more you trust. And trust is what allows presence to deepen. You stop bracing, you stop guarding, you let the moment arrive on its own terms. Even discomfort becomes less threatening. You've seen how everything in nature passes. Storms, wind, cold, noise. So do thoughts, so do moods, so does pain. This trust becomes a foundation, not an idea, a felt truth. You carry it back with you, into cities, into conversations, into noise. And even there, something inside remains quiet, because it's been reminded of something older, something that doesn't break under pressure, something that doesn't 39 need to speak to know. Rewilding awareness is not about finding wilderness, it's about removing the barrier between you and life. It's about letting the wind be enough, letting the trees teach without explanation, letting the sound of water return you to now. It's not a romantic ideal, it's not about escape, It's about returning to the part of you that never left. The part that doesn't need words to be awake. The part that senses, listens, moves, breathes, without needing a reason. And when that part leads, presence is no longer something to reach for. It's something you rest in, something you follow, something you trust. Because it's not made, it's remembered, not as something separate, but as who you are, completely here, wild, awake, and already whole. And once your awareness has been reawakened by the living earth once, the natural world has reminded you that stillness is already within you, you begin to see that presence doesn't only belong to solitude or silence. It doesn't need to be protected by distance or quiet. Stillness is not about sitting still. It's not about being still. It's about moving without being lost, about doing without being distracted. It's about letting awareness remain unbroken, even while the body walks, the arms reach, the voice speaks. This is the presence that holds steady through movement. This is stillness in motion. Most people believe presence requires stopping. They associate mindfulness with silence, with closing the eyes, with turning away from the activity of the world. But presence is not tied to posture. It's not confined to sitting. It is attention, alive and intact, no matter what the body is doing. To discover this is to break the false boundary between meditation and life. It's to know that walking can be meditation, that chopping vegetables can be presence, that dancing can be awareness, that your life, as it is presence. Already the practice. In Zen monasteries, monks walk in circles before and after seated meditation. This isn't to transition between stillness and motion. Neat is to remain in stillness while moving. The pace is steady. The foot is placed with full attention, not just awareness of the foot, but awareness of the contact, the shift of weight, the breath as it joins the step. Each movement becomes a moment of arrival, not trying to get anywhere, just being where the body is. The Thai forest tradition also honors this principle. Forest monks walk back and forth on the same path for hours, not to exercise, not to travel, but to stabilize presence, to let the body teach the mind how to stay. Walking becomes a way of anchoring, a way of remembering that attention is not fragile, it can travel with you. This doesn't require robes or rituals. You don't need to walk slowly. You don't need to copy tradition. You only need to be here while you move, to feel the heel touch the floor, to notice the shift in your hips, to let the rhythm of walking carry you into presence. You move, but you're not seeking. You're not escaping. You're not doing something on the way to something else. You are moving inside stillness. This awareness can begin in small ways. As you walk from one room to another, as you make your bed, as you brush your teeth, you pause internally. Not to stop, but to feel. You feel the texture of the floor, the weight of your body, the temperature of the air, the breath as it joins the rhythm. This is not extra work. It's the return to what's already happening. Stillness in motion doesn't remove thought. It simply includes it. A thought may rise as you walk, but you don't follow it. You let it pass like scenery. Your body remains here. Your step remains steady. The thought doesn't interrupt the movement. It becomes part of the landscape. Dancing also becomes a powerful way to access this presence. Not performance dancing, not dancing for others, but movement that rises from the inside. You let the body move with no plan. You let the breath guide rhythm. You stop needing to look a certain way. You let sensation lead, not image. And as you move, you stay aware. Aware of the sway, the tension, the release, the breath, the beat. There's no self-image, no judgment, just being lived by movement. In that, something opens. You are not thinking the dance, you are the dancing. This kind of movement teaches trust. The body knows how to move, it knows how to adjust. You don't have to plan each gesture. You learn to follow instead of control. You learn to let sensation rise and respond. Awareness doesn't freeze, it flows. Stillness in action also includes work. You can wash dishes with presence, fold clothes, sweep a floor, carry a child. These are not lesser practices. They are doorways. If the mind is here, if the breath is here, then the task becomes sacred, not because it changes, but because you are in it fully. Doing doesn't need to be mechanical. It can be intentional. Each gesture can be a form of care. This presence brings softness to daily life. You stop rushing. You don't lose efficiency. You just lose the feeling of chasing something. Each task is complete in itself. You don't measure how much is left. You meet what is here. The next thing will come. But right now, there's only this. Stillness in motion also reveals what is unnecessary. When you're present while walking, you see the tension you carry, the rushing that doesn't help, the leaning forward that's not needed, the shallow breath that shortens your stride. These are small details, but they shape your life. Noticing them means reclaiming choice. You can soften, you can release, you can move without bracing. There's also emotional clarity that comes when presence is steady in action. You feel a reaction rising, but you don't collapse into it. You keep moving, you breathe, you sense the energy in the body. You stay aware, and the emotion passes without becoming a storm. You didn't avoid it, you moved with it. You remained in contact. This capacity transforms relationships. You listen while doing. You stay connected, even while busy. You don't disappear into tasks. You bring presence with you. This presence becomes felt by others. It's not about doing less. It's about being more fully with what you do. That's what changes the quality of Publit's connection. There's a rhythm that emerges when movement and presence merge. Not rigid, not forced, natural, flowing. You know what to do next, not because you thought it through, but because awareness is unobstructed. This doesn't mean perfect results, it means full engagement. Mistakes may happen, but they happen inside wholeness, not distraction. Over time, this practice reveals something deeper, that movement itself is not separate from stillness, that the body can be busy while the mind is still, that action can unfold without agitation. You begin to feel the center that doesn't move, the quiet axis inside all the doing. It holds you. It's never rushed, never scattered. It remains steady as the body moves, as the world turns. And from this place, you stop craving rest as escape. You're no longer exhausted by action, because presence isn't drained by movement. It's only drained by divided attention. When your doing is whole, you are energized, aligned, at ease. Stillness in motion is not an advanced practice. It is the heart of life itself. Breath moves, blood moves. The body lives through motion, and you don't need to leave any of it behind to return to presence. You only need to stay with it, not watching from a distance, but from within. This presence is always available, in walking, in reaching, in turning a page, in closing a door, in lifting a cup. You don't need new tools. You don't need more silence. You just need to let attention join the movement. Let presence move with you. And when it does, you will see. There's nothing ordinary about these motions. They are your life. Not something on the way to life. Not something you do to earn rest. They are where life unfolds. Fully. Completely. With awareness not as a container but as the very motion itself. Whole. Fluid. Awake. Here. And once you, 39, remembered how to move without leaving yourself, once your actions unfold with stillness at the center, you begin to notice something even more elusive, something that doesn't come from the outside, but rises quietly from within. It doesn't feel aggressive, it doesn't shout, but it pulls. It leans forward, it whispers that this moment isn't quite enough. It makes now feel like a waiting room. It makes the next thing seem more important. This is desire, not the loud kind, but the subtle restlessness that tugs at attention and turns presence into pursuit. Desire doesn't only live in obvious craving, it shows up in small ways. In the quick glance toward something more pleasurable, in the urge to check, to scroll, to move on. It hides inside even noble intentions, the hope for a deeper state, the wish to feel more peace, the seeking of spiritual progress. All of these seem harmless, but they add weight to the moment. They tell you that what is here now is not enough. This kind of desire doesn't always come with intensity. Sometimes it's just a tension in the body, a small tightness behind the eyes, a slight clenching in the jaw, a holding of the breath. Presence begins to narrow. The world is no longer being received. It is being used to get somewhere else. To see this clearly, you must slow down, not in pace, but in attention. Begin to notice the moment. Desire arises, that flicker of wanting, the movement of the mind toward what's next, the soft turning away from what is. It can be as subtle as a thought. It would be better if, or almost there. This tiny gap pulls you from presence, not because of what you want, but because of how you relate to the wanting. Wanting itself is not the problem. The Buddha never said desire should be destroyed. What he pointed to was clinging, how we attach to the idea that fulfillment lies ahead, not here. When that belief takes hold, awareness becomes clouded. You no longer meet the moment as it is. You use it to get something else. And presence is traded for projection. The work is not to eliminate desire. That only creates more struggle. The work is to see it without following it, to feel the wanting without becoming it, to stay still while it moves. You can notice desire as a visitor. It shows up, it rises, it carries energy, and then it fades. You don't have to act on it. You don't have to fight it. You can witness it. This requires honesty. The mind often disguises craving as purpose. It says, I just want clarity, or I'm pursuing truth. But underneath there is discomfort with the present, an unwillingness to sit with what is unresolved. The practice here is to question that urgency. What if nothing was missing? What if this moment didn't need to be improved? When you look at desire closely, you begin to see its anatomy. There is an object, something you believe will bring ease, pleasure, peace. Then there is a story, that having this thing will make you whole. Then there is the reaching, the inner motion toward that goal. If you stop at any point in this process, you can return to presence. You don't need to wait for fulfillment. You can unhook in the middle of the reach. Often what you truly want is not the object, but the feeling you believe it will bring. Peace, belonging, joy, security. But these states are already accessible. They are here, just buried under the noise of striving. When you stop chasing the object, you can turn toward the feeling directly. You can breathe into the restlessness and find the calm behind it. One way to practice this is through the body. Desire always lives in sensation. You might feel it in the chest, in the belly, in the hands. You can bring your attention there, not to suppress it, but to meet it. You let the sensation unfold. You stay with it. You let it burn without flinching. And in that presence, the energy begins to soften. It no longer owns you. Another way is to slow the moment of decision. When you feel pulled to act an impulse, on habit, on wanting, pause. Take one breath. Feel your feet. Ask gently, what am I really seeking? What do I believe this will give me? And is it already here in some form? This questioning is not to stop you, but to wake you up, to bring attention back from fantasy to reality. Desire is not always about getting. Sometimes it's about avoiding. You may want distraction because you're resisting discomfort. You may want stimulation because you're afraid of stillness. These are also cravings, and they can be seen with kindness. When you witness them without judgment, they loosen. They don't vanish, but they no longer guide your every move. This awareness creates freedom, not because desire disappears, but because it's no longer in charge. You can feel longing without losing clarity. You can experience attraction without being pulled. You can want something and still be fully present with what is. Over time, this changes how you relate to everything. Food, conversation, work, practice. You stop using moments to get somewhere. You meet them directly. You taste your food without rushing. You speak without needing approval. You work without seeking validation. You practice without trying to become better. This doesn't make you passive, it makes you rooted. You move not from lack, but from alignment. Even spiritual seeking becomes more balanced. You stop chasing awakening like a possession. You stop measuring your progress against others. You start trusting what's unfolding. You understand that the path is not somewhere else. It's right here, in how you meet desire, in how you sit with the part of you that wants more, wants different, wants escape, and say, I see you, I'm not leaving. There's a humility that comes with this. You begin to see how much of your restlessness was driven by fear, by the belief that presence isn't enough. But when you stop chasing, you realize it is, not because it always feels good, but because it's real, because it's the only place where life actually happens. Desire still comes, it always will. But now it becomes a bell, a signal, a moment to return. Instead of being swept away, you come back. You notice the grip. You soften it. You let the energy rise and pass. You begin again and again. This repetition becomes strength. Each time you choose presence over craving, you shift the pattern. You create space where there used to be reactivity. You develop steadiness, not by force, but by feeling. Not by rejecting desire, but by not obeying it blindly. You stop needing every moment to entertain you. You stop needing to fix what isn't broken. You begin to trust boredom, trust slowness, trust uncertainty. You let life be what it is, not what you demand it to be. This doesn't mean you lose joy. It means your joy no longer depends on getting what you want. It arises from contact, from truth, from being fully here. You find beauty not in novelty, but in depth, in texture, in breath. Desire becomes less personal, less charged. It rises, It teaches. It fades. You don't hold it tightly. You don't push it away. You listen. You stay. You move when movement is true, not when craving commands it. And in that steadiness, something new is revealed. Peace not as a goal, but as a ground. Freedom not as escape, but as intimacy. Stillness not as silence, but as presence undisturbed by wanting. And this, quietly, becomes enough. Not because it fills every longing, but because it no longer hides from any of them. Because you are here, clear, rooted, awake, even when desire comes. Especially then. And after meeting desire with clarity, after learning how to stay without chasing, to soften without resisting, you begin to notice something even more subtle. Not the pull of wanting, but the way the mind tries to name what is happening. It happens automatically. A sound becomes a bird. A sensation becomes itchy. An emotion becomes sadness. Even awareness becomes a story. I am being mindful. These thoughts come quickly, and they feel close to truth. But in that moment of naming, something is lost. You move one step away from what is. You begin to relate not to the experience itself, but to the idea of it. This is the core misunderstanding that many people carry about presence. That to be present is to think about what's happening, to describe it, to reflect on it, to recognize it through thought. But presence isn't thinking about the moment. Presence is being in the moment, without a filter, without a label, without needing to know what it is. When people first begin to practice, they often say things like, "I'm aware of my breath," or "I'm present with my body." But what they're really noticing is the mind talking about those things. It's subtle but powerful. The difference between touching an experience and talking to yourself about touching it is the difference between real presence and the appearance of presence. The thought may seem close to the experience, but it's still a step removed. True presence lives before the thought. It's what's already here before the mind speaks. It's the warmth on your skin before the word sun appears. The sound in your ears before you call it traffic. The ache in your chest before the story about Wyatt, 39's there. These things don't need language to be felt. They don't need interpretation to be real. Direct experience doesn't ask to be understood. It just asks to be met, and it can only be met by attention, not analysis. Attention without reaching, without grasping, without turning sensation into idea. This kind of attention is quiet. It doesn't 39. It's look for insight. It simply rests in what's already true. To practice this, you begin by noticing when the mind names something. You hear a sound, and the word dog arises. That's fine. But can you drop beneath the word? Can you stay with the vibration, the rhythm, the texture of sound itself? Not what it is, not what it reminds you of, just the raw contact. This can be done with any sense. Touch the fabric of your clothing before the word soft or rough or familiar comes in. Stay with the sensation, noticing the temperature, the pressure, the shift as you move. If a word arises, let it pass. Don't push it away, but don't follow it. Return to the actual contact. This kind of presence cannot be grasped by thought. It's not something you understand first and feel later. It's something you feel, and in that feeling, understanding dissolves. You don't need to hold on to it. You don't need to say, "This is the present moment." You are simply in it. The minute you say, "This is it," you are already moving slightly away. Thought always happens after the moment. Even the thought, "I'm here," comes after the here has already arrived. So the more you think about being present, the more you create a concept of presence instead of the experience of it. It's not a mistake, it's just the nature of thought. But knowing this lets you drop more deeply into direct contact. This isn't about making thought wrong. Thought is part of experience too, but it doesn't need to lead. It can be background. Presence leads by staying with what is raw, unfiltered, unknown. You don't need to name each breath. You don't need to track each emotion. You just feel fully, without the extra layer. The challenge is that the mind is trained to analyze. It wants to know, to describe, to organize. And that's useful for many things, but presence doesn't need that structure. It needs your willingness to not know, to sit in sensation without rushing to explain, to listen without turning it into a sentence. This openness invites reality to reveal itself in new ways. When you don't label a feeling as good or bad, you feel its complexity. When you don't name a sensation, you feel its detail. When you stop thinking, "I'm being present," you drop deeper into actual presence. The thinking isn't wrong, it's just extra. You can notice it and return. This return is what builds trust. Not trust in thought, but in awareness itself. You begin to see that you don't need to interpret every moment to be with it. You don't need to explain your emotions to feel them. You don't need to narrate your breath to experience it. This is not detachment, it's intimacy, deeper than any thought can offer. It's a meeting that happens beneath the words. Presence becomes simpler, softer, less dramatic, and more true. Not because you understand it better, but because you stop trying to. Even in daily life, this shift changes things. You eat a piece of fruit. Instead of thinking, "This is sweet," you just feel the taste. Instead of planning the next bite, you stay with the current one. Instead of thinking about how you're doing, you let yourself just do, without commentary, without needing to hold it all together. This kind of attention slows time in a natural way, not because the world moves slower, but because you're no longer skipping over what's here. You're not moving past the moment to think about it. You're letting it unfold without stepping in front of it. And in that space, peace arises. You also become more sensitive to when you're leaving presence, when you move from feeling into explanation, from seeing into labeling, from hearing into analyzing. Not to judge it, but to notice it. And in that noticing, you can return. This is how presence deepens, not by effort, but by subtle release. The release of naming, of comparing, of defining. Each time you let a thought pass without following it, you come back to what's real. Not the idea of now, but now itself. And this now doesn't need to be special. It doesn't need to feel peaceful or beautiful or profound. It just needs to be met, fully, with nothing added, nothing removed, no story, no title, just the living truth of experience, moment by moment, breath by breath. That's the doorway, always open, always available, not in thought, but in the quiet knowing that exists, before thought, behind thought, beneath it, a presence that never needed to be describedly remembered and returned to again and again, without needing to say, "This is it," because it already is. And once you've seen through the thought of presence, once you've dropped beneath the words, beyond the labels, into the rawness of direct experience, what comes next is the full meeting of life, without turning away. Not a concept of being here, but the practice of staying even when it 39 s uncomfortable, even when it's not easy. Presence deepens not when everything feels right, but when nothing needs to be changed. This is where presence becomes more than awareness. It becomes non-resistance. Non-resistance is not passivity. It's not giving up. It's not pretending that pain feels good or that confusion isn't difficult. It's the willingness to stop fighting what is already here. Most suffering comes not from the moment itself, but from the tension of pushing it away. The mind says, "This shouldn't be happening." The body tenses, the thoughts spiral, but the moment is still here. Resistance doesn't remove pain, it adds struggle on top of it. To let everything be just as it is means to meet each experience without pulling back. To allow the process relevant, tightness in the chest, the ache in the heart, the confusion in the mind, not because you want them, but because they are already part of the moment. Presence holds them without needing them to resolve. It watches pain without shrinking from it. It feels discomfort without rushing to fix it. This is radical because it goes against all your habits of protection. The first step is noticing how resistance shows up. It's rarely loud. It's often a small clenching in the sacral body, a judgmental thought, a subtle urgency to escape. It might sound like, "I can't take this," or "Why is this still happening?" These thoughts seem helpful, but they're reactions. They're not solutions. They push you away from the experience instead of inviting you in. Non-resistance starts with a simple question: can this be here, just as it is? You're not asking whether it's pleasant. You're asking whether you're willing to stop fighting it. Even a small yes opens space. It doesn't make the pain disappear, but it stops the struggle. You're no longer tightening around the moment. You're allowing it to move. This shift is subtle but powerful. When you stop bracing against what is, you begin to feel what's really there. You feel the raw sensation of sadness without needing a story. You feel the pressure of anger without acting it out. You feel the ache of confusion without demanding answers. These experiences stop being enemies. They become visitors, messengers, waves rising in awareness. Non-resistance isn't numbness, it's full contact. You meet the moment with open hands. You feel it fully, but you don't harden against it. This openness allows experience to move. What stays stuck is not the pain, it's your refusal to feel it. When you soften the refusal, the energy begins to shift on its own, not always quickly, but naturally. This practice builds resilience, not because you become invulnerable, but because you become less reactive. You trust yourself to stay. You don't panic when discomfort arises. You don't rush to escape it. You recognize that you are not the pain. You are the awareness that holds it. Even thoughts can be met this way. You don't have to believe them or silence them. You simply stop resisting their presence. You notice the anxious thought and let it be there. You feel the doubt and let it float. You hear the inner critic and don't argue. You just watch. You allow. You stay. The same goes for emotion. Presence doesn't need to feel calm to be complete. Anger can be here. Fear can be here. Joy can be here. Boredom can be here. Each emotion is allowed to rise and fall without needing to be managed. You stop needing to fix your inner world. You begin to trust its intelligence. Non-resistance also changes how you relate to the body. Pain doesn't have to be resisted. You don't have to like it, but you can meet it, feel into it, notice where it lives, how it moves, how it shifts. You stop fighting sensation, and in that space, You might notice the layers beneath, the grief under the tension, the fear behind the tightness. You feel what's there. You don't need to explain it. You let it be felt. This softening allows healing, not because you force it, but because you stop interfering with it. The body knows how to process. The heart knows how to unfold. The mind knows how to settle. What slows it down is your resistance. You're trying to manage every moment. Letting everything be just as it is also includes the parts of you that resist. You don't need to eliminate resistance. You notice it. You meet it too. You say, this too is allowed. Even the part of me that wants to run, even the part that tightens, even the part that judges. Nothing is pushed out of awareness. This radical inclusion creates peace. Not peace as the absence of difficulty, but peace as the absence of division. You are no longer split inside yourself, no longer in a war with your own heart. Presence becomes whole, spacious, clear, not because life is easy, but because nothing is being excluded. This practice also brings honesty. You stop pretending. You stop needing to mask your pain or hide your fear. You meet your life without a filter. This honesty is tender, vulnerable, but it's also powerful. It's the power of not flinching, of not turning away, of staying present with the raw truth. Even confusion is allowed. You don't need to understand what's happening. You don't need to know where it's going. You stop needing clarity to be at peace. You let uncertainty be here. You breathe with it. You rest inside the not knowing. This is one of the deepest forms of non-resistance. It changes how you move through the world. You become less defensive, less afraid of mistakes, less obsessed with being right. You don't need to control everything. You learn to meet each moment as it comes. You stop needing it to match your expectations. And when things go wrong, as they sometimes will, you don't collapse. You don't fight the moment. You feel it. You stay. You respond from presence, not panic. You move from clarity, not contraction. This is how non-resistance becomes strength, quiet, rooted, unshaken. It also transforms relationships. You stop needing others to behave a certain way for you to be okay. You allow their mood, their confusion, their silence. You don't always agree, but you don't resist their being. This makes space for connection, for truth, for compassion. This kind of presence is not flashy. It's not dramatic. It doesn't make you feel enlightened. But it changes everything, because it removes the inner war. You are no longer trying to edit your experience. You are living it fully as it is. And this is not a final state. It's a moment-by-moment practice, a constant invitation. Life will keep bringing you new edges, new discomforts, new places where resistance appears, and each one is another chance to soften, to open, to return. To let this be enough, even now, especially now, no fixing, no fleeing, just full-hearted presence. Nothing rejected, nothing denied, everything held, everything included, just as it is. And once you begin to let each moment be just as it is, without arguing, without defending, without needing anything to feel different, you start to feel something underneath the surface of your experience. A kind of weight, a heaviness that's not loud but constant. Sometimes it's sadness, sometimes irritation, sometimes restlessness, sometimes just a vague pressure that something's not quite right. This is what the Buddha called dukkha, often translated as suffering, but not always pain in a dramatic sense. More often it's subtle, familiar, and persistent. But what if this wasn't something to get rid of? What if this was your teacher? Dukkha is the unease that rises when we want things to be other than they are. It shows up in craving, in resistance, in confusion. But the mistake is thinking that its presence means something has gone wrong. What if it means something is waking up? What if each moment of discomfort is not a sign to escape, but a bell ringing softly, reminding you to return? This changes everything, because most of the time, discomfort makes us leave ourselves. We move into thought, into blame, into avoidance. We tighten around the experience, try to explain it, try to change it. But dukkha doesn't ask to be solved, it asks to be seen. The moment you meet it without pushing it away, its shape starts to change. It becomes less of a wall and more of a doorway. To use dukkha as a bell of mindfulness is to reverse the habit of reaction. Instead of turning away, you turn toward, not to fix, not to analyze, but to feel. You let the discomfort be your signal that now is the time to breathe. Now is the time to pause. Now is the time to soften. This is not a punishment. This is practice. When tension rises, most people meet it with a problem-solving mindset. How do I make this stop? What caused this? What's wrong with me? But presence doesn't ask those questions. It asks, can I feel this fully? Where does it live in the body? What does it want me to notice? This attention changes your relationship with discomfort. It stops being an enemy. It becomes information, a message, not one to be interpreted, but one to be honored. You don't need to know why. The sadness is here. You only need to feel it. You don't need to understand your frustration. You only need to breathe with it. That meeting, freedom, begins. Not after suffering, through it, with presence as your ground, and dukkha as your call to return. And once you've learned how to meet discomfort, not as a threat, but as a doorway, once dukkha becomes a signal that gently brings you back to awareness, another question begins to rise. If presence can hold pain, stillness, movement, confusion, clarity, even craving, then why should it stop at the edge of sleep? What happens to awareness when the body rests? What happens when the thinking mind dissolves into dream? If presence is true, it must be true always, not just in waking. And this leads to one of the most subtle and powerful explorations of the path, carrying mindfulness into the world of sleep. Most people think of sleep as the absence of consciousness, something passive, something that happens to them. But in the early Buddhist and Tibetan traditions, sleep is not a break from practice. It's a continuation, a space where awareness can remain, even when form changes, even when thoughts become symbols and time bends, and the world around you no longer follows logic. This is not a mystical concept. It's a skill that can be cultivated, a deepening of presence that includes all states, not just the waking ones. Lucid dreaming is the capacity to be aware while dreaming, to know that you are dreaming as the dream unfolds. It doesn't mean controlling the dream. It means not being fooled by it. It means remembering presence even as the mind weaves new worlds. And behind this ability is the same principle that governs all mindfulness: the ability to remember, to return, to recognize experience as it is. To practice this doesn't begin in sleep. It begins now, with learning how to recognize thought as thought, sensation as sensation, emotion as energy. The clearer you become in waking life, the more likely that clarity follows you into dreaming. You train the mind to remember itself, to stay present even as everything shifts. The foundation of this work is intention, not forced, not rigid, but clear. Before sleep, the mind is often scattered, filled with stories from the day, planning for tomorrow, carrying leftover tension. But when you bring gentle attention into those final moments, feeling the breath, softening the body, setting the intention to stay aware, something inside you listens. This simple act begins to shape the threshold between waking and dreaming. Lucid dreaming is not about special powers. It's about remembering what is real, even when the mind forgets. And what is real is not the content of the dream, but the awareness that sees it. This awareness doesn't sleep. It doesn't disappear when the body does. It remains, like a silent observer, steady and untouched. One method of cultivating lucidity is to practice reality checks during the day, asking yourself gently, "Am I dreaming?" Not to doubt reality, but to train recognition. The habit of questioning experience builds a reflex that can appear in dreams, and when it does, you notice something strange, a shift in light, an impossible event, a familiar place with new edges, and in that moment of noticing, awareness wakes up. Another method is waking back to sleep. You rise in the early morning, stay awake briefly, then return to bed with clear intention. The gap creates space for awareness to stay close as sleep returns. You may find yourself dreaming, but now watching the dream, knowing it's a dream. The body rests, but the mind remains awake. This state is not just a curiosity, it's a profound teacher. In dreams, the mind reveals its patterns without filter. Emotions rise as symbols. Desires play out in surreal forms. Fears become landscapes. And when you are aware, in the middle of it, you see these movements not as distractions, but as teachings. You learn about your conditioning, your tendencies, your deepest hopes and tensions. You can respond to dreams differently when you are aware. Instead of reacting with fear or excitement, you can observe. Instead of running, you can stay. Instead of controlling, you can explore. And each moment of awareness in the dream becomes another step in the path, another opportunity to stay awake. Tibetan dream yoga goes even deeper. It is not only about lucidity, but about seeing the dreamlike nature of all experience, not just in sleep, but in waking. It uses dreams as a way to understand emptiness, that form is not solid, that experience is not fixed, that all things arise and fade. When you wake up inside a dream, and you see how real it felt, and then how it vanished, you start to question the solidity of waking life, not in a detached way, but in a freeing one. This realization is not an escape, it's an invitation to engage more deeply. You no longer grasp as tightly. You no longer fear change as much. You begin to understand that awareness is the constant, whether you are dreaming or awake, happy or grieving, thinking or sleeping. That awareness does not break when forms shift. Even if you never become fully lucid in dreams, bringing attention to the sleep process changes everything. You stop falling into unconsciousness. You begin to soften into it. You meet sleep as a continuation of practice. You allow the breath to guide you into rest. You release effort without releasing awareness. This kind of presence makes rest deeper because you are no longer bracing against the unknown. You are entering it with clarity. The body sleeps, but the mind is not lost. It remembers stillness. It remembers space. and you begin to wake up more gently, not jarred, not disconnected, but rooted. You might also notice the moments just before sleep and just after waking. These are thresholds rich in awareness. You may find images, thoughts, feelings rising with clarity, not random, not noise, but messages from the deeper mind, not to be interpreted with analysis, but to be felt, to be met. You can use these moments as anchors, breathing into the shift, staying close to the now. Over time, sleep becomes part of the path, not a break from practice, not a lapse in presence, but another layer of consciousness. You don't need to perform. You don't need to control dreams. You simply allow awareness to remain, to travel with you, to hold whatever arises. This shifts how you view life itself. If you can remain aware while dreaming, then where does awareness end? Where does presence stop? What boundaries are as solid as they seemed? You begin to live with more openness, more humility, less certainty, but more trust. And the trust is not in outcomes, it's in awareness itself, that it knows what to do, that it can hold everything, dreams, thoughts, fears, stillness, that you don't need to manage presence, you only need to return to it again and again, even while asleep. This return is the essence of the path. 1,000 times forgotten, 1,001 times returned. Whether sitting, walking, speaking, or dreaming, you learn not to separate states of being. You learn to bring attention everywhere, to remember the thread, to live from that thread. So when you rest tonight, you don't fall asleep. You let go into it. You don't disconnect. You allow presence to remain, even if just for a few seconds. Even if you forget, you set the intention, may awareness stay close. May clarity follow me. May I rest not just in body, but in being. And in that resting, the practice continues, not with effort, but with openness, with the understanding. That presence has no edge, no border, no division. Only this awareness here, through waking and sleeping, through light and dark, through all the layers of this life, always waiting, always whole, already free. And once awareness has been carried into sleep once, even your dreams become part of the path. You begin to notice that presence doesn't belong to special moments. It doesn't depend on intensity or insight. In fact, the deepest access to stillness often comes not from the unusual, but from what's most familiar, the overlooked, the automatic, the parts of life that repeat again and again without question. Routine, habit, the simple tasks you've done so many times that you no longer feel them. But underneath that surface is a hidden doorway. Repetition isn't the enemy of awareness. It's the perfect condition for it. When something becomes routine, the body knows how to do it without constant instruction, and that frees your attention not to wander, but to deepen. It gives you a chance to move beyond figuring out what to do and into how it feels to do it. If you stay inside the repetition with full presence, something new begins to emerge. You realize that sameness isn't dull. It's rich, it's layered, it's alive, if you're truly there for it. Presence in repetition means noticing the detail. The way your hand reaches for the same mug every morning, the rhythm of water hitting your skin in the shower, the texture of socks sliding over your feet. These are not distractions from the practice. They are the practice. They are the moments where life is already happening, asking nothing from you but your attention. This kind of awareness doesn't need to add meaning. It doesn't turn tasks into metaphors. It simply stays close to what's true. You make your bed, not to complete something, but to feel your hands press against the fabric, the softness, the sound of the sheet as it moves. You brush your teeth not to finish fast, but to sense each movement of the brush, the changing taste, the shifting balance in your feet. You drive the same road not as a blur, but as a sequence of sensations, the way the wheel feels, the movement of light, the texture of sound. Routine becomes a container for presence when you stop running from it. Most people escape repetition by losing themselves in thought. They turn habit into a background for worry, distraction, projection. But every routine is offering something else, a stable structure in which awareness can grow strong, a consistent rhythm where you can train attention moment by moment without needing novelty to keep it awake. This is not about forcing interest. It's about becoming sensitive. Every repetition contains small variations. No two breaths are identical. No two steps fall exactly the same. If you listen closely, the body speaks in different tones. The mind shifts in subtle ways. The world around you moves with changing textures. You begin to see that even repetition is in motion. Monastics have long understood this. Chopping wood, drawing water, sweeping floors, these were never chores to be rushed. They were fields for attention. Every motion done with full presence becomes a kind of prayer, a bow to the sacredness of what's here. Not because the task is grand, but because it's real. The challenge is remembering. Habit is strong. It pulls you into sleep, but presence can return in any moment. As soon as you notice that you've gone unconscious, that the mind has drifted away from the task, you gently come back. Not with judgment, not with pressure, just with breath, with contact, with willingness. And the more you return, the more the routine becomes alive, the more it reveals itself. You stop wishing the moment away. You stop waiting for something else. You start to feel what's always been available, presence hidden in plain sight. This kind of awareness brings stability, not excitement, not stimulation, but steadiness. You no longer need dramatic experiences to feel connected. You find meaning in the mundane. You see that peace doesn't come from what you're doing, but from how you're with it. Repetition also helps dissolve the ego's need for achievement. When you do the same thing every day, there's no performance. There's no need to be impressive. You just show up. You just feel. You just breathe. And in that simplicity, the heart opens. You are not trying to become anything. You are simply being. This doesn't make the task less valuable. It makes it more intimate. You stop rushing through your day to get to the so-called important parts. You realize that importance is not based on what the world says matters. It's based on presence, on whether you are actually here for what is happening. Even creative work follows this rhythm. Artists know the power of repetition, the practice of returning to the same brushstroke, the same phrase, the same gesture, over and over, not because it's boring, but because each return offers a deeper connection. Repetition becomes a gateway not to dullness, but to refinement, to truth. And when challenges arise, as they will, you are already trained. The stability you've cultivated in repetition gives you the ground to stand on. You know how to return. You know how to stay. You've practiced presence, not in rare moments, but in daily life. And that practice holds you when things fall apart. This kind of mindfulness can be cultivated in every environment. At work, in conversation, while cooking, while cleaning. You don't need a quiet room. You don't need a retreat. You just need willingness, a decision to be where you are, to meet each repetition as if it matters, because it does. The world doesn't need you to be extraordinary, it needs you to be awake. And that awakening often starts not in transformation, but in repetition, in seeing the beauty in what you already do, in not needing something different to feel whole. This is not about romanticizing the ordinary, it's about stopping the escape from it. It's about realizing that this is your life. The way you tie your shoes, the way you answer the phone, the way you touch the faucet, close the door, drink your tea. These are not just actions, they are invitations to wake up, to return, to be real. Over time, these habits become rituals, not because you add anything to them, but because you remove the resistance. You meet them with full presence. They become containers of care. You begin to love the repetition, not because it's exciting, but because it holds you. This doesn't mean you stop growing, it means your growth is rooted in presence. You stop measuring your evolution by how different things look. You start sensing it by how deeply you're able to be with what hasn't changed. You find freedom not in variety, but in intimacy. You begin to understand that the real practice is not about having new experiences, but about meeting familiar experiences in a new way, with fresh attention, with full breath, with open awareness. And from there, repetition becomes not a cycle, but a spiral. You return to the same task, but you are not the same. Your attention is clearer, your presence deeper. The act has not changed, but your way of being with it has, and that is transformation. Quiet, steady, real. The most ordinary parts of life, when met with presence, become the most profound. They don't need fair to be explained. They don't need to be turned into symbols. They are sacred in their simplicity. And, when you know this, nothing is ever truly mundane again, because the routine holds a secret. The secret is, you were never far from presence. You only needed to stop skipping over the parts you thought didn't matter. And once you stop skipping, you begin to feel the truth. Every step, every breath, every motion, it's all here. It always was. You just had to return. And now you do. Not in a rush, not as a task, but as a quiet remembering. That presence is not hidden in what's new. It's shining through what repeats, waiting to be seen, ready to be lived, right here. Again, and again, and again. And once presence is discovered in the rhythm of what repeats, even the most familiar actions become gateways to stillness. Attention naturally turns to what arises within those quiet spaces. Speech, because after all the walking, folding and breathing, you speak, you reach out with words, you build bridges with sentences. But how often is that speech shaped by awareness? How often is it born from silence rather than habit? Words are not just sounds, they are extensions of intention. And when spoken from full presence, they become more than communication, they become practice. Speaking is one of the most powerful actions we perform. A single word can uplift or destroy. A conversation can build peace or prolong suffering. And yet, because it happens so quickly, we often don't see how deeply it matters. In Buddhist teachings, speech is given a place of honor not as a moral checklist, but as a path to freedom. Right speech, one limb of the Noble Eightfold Path, asks not only that we speak truthfully, but that we speak with presence, that our words arise from care, from clarity, from contact with what's real. To unbind the tongue means first to see how tightly it's often held, not just in silence, but in tension, in compulsion, In reactivity, we speak to fill space, to avoid discomfort, to defend ourselves, to perform, to be liked. And many of these habits are invisible, woven into personality, but presence has no need to prove. It only speaks when there is something honest to say, and it stays quiet when silence holds more truth than sound. The beginning of mindful speech is pausing, not to suppress the voice, but to meet it before it moves. That pause is not blank, it is alive. In that pause, you feel the breath, the intention, the energy behind, the urge to speak. You ask, is this true? Is it kind? Is it useful? Is it needed now? These questions are not rules. They are invitations to presence. They help uncover what lies beneath the words. Truthfulness is the foundation, but it goes deeper than avoiding lies. It means not exaggerating to impress, not distorting to control, not speaking with half-awareness just to keep momentum. Truthful speech is clear, simple. It doesn't decorate. It doesn't dramatize. It reflects what is, without leaning in or pulling away. Kindness is not softness. It's strength held with compassion. Speech that arises from presence does not harm. It doesn't use others as targets. It doesn't strike just because it can. It speaks with the understanding that every word lands somewhere on a heart, in a mind, in a moment that cannot be undone. Mindful speech takes responsibility for where it lands. Usefulness means relevance. Not every truth needs to be said. Not every opinion needs to be offered. Speech is mindful when it serves something real: clarity, connection, healing, understanding, presence. Listens for whether the moment is right for the words. It doesn't rush to fill quiet. It doesn't seek to be heard more than it seeks to be helpful. This kind of speech cannot be forced. It can only be grown through awareness, through listening, through stillness. The more you listen deeply, fully, without planning your response, the more your words begin to arise from truth rather than reaction. Listening is not passive, it's an active choice to make space. And in that space, presence speaks more clearly. Often, the most damaging words come not from malice but from unconsciousness. A hurried reply, a careless comment, a defensive tone. These moments create division not just between people but between you and your own integrity. Right speech is not just about what others hear, it's about what you feel when you say it. Do your words leave you more whole, more honest, more aligned? The body is a compass for speech. Tension in the jaw, tightness in the chest, unease in the gut. These are not obstacles, they are signals. They show you when something feels off, when you are speaking from fear, from habit, from performance. When you notice this tension, you pause, you breathe, you ask again, is this necessary? Is it rooted in truth? Presence also changes the rhythm of speech. You stop interrupting, you stop rushing, you let silence be part of the conversation. You let the breath finish its cycle before the next word forms. This gives your words space. It gives others space. And in that space, connection deepens. Language also becomes simpler, not dumbed down, but uncluttered. You stop using words to impress. You stop hiding behind complexity. Presence speaks clearly. It trusts that truth doesn't need decoration. And this clarity brings ease not just for you, but for the one listening. Even disagreement shifts. You don't speak to win, you speak to understand. You express what's real for you without trying to dominate. You hold your truth gently, allowing it to meet someone else's without needing to erase theirs. This doesn't mean you never challenge, but your challenge comes from care, not conquest. When you practice mindful speech, silence becomes less threatening. You no longer feel the need to fill every pause. You trust the quiet to speak on its own. Sometimes what's most honest is nothing. Sometimes what heals most is space. And this practice ripples out. In relationships, words become bridges, not because you say everything right, but because you're present when you speak. People feel that. They feel when they're being spoken to rather than at. They feel when words are alive, not scripted. This presence creates safety, trust, openness. It also changes how you speak to yourself. That inner voice softens. It becomes less cruel, less impatient. You hear the habits of self-judgment, and you pause. You choose words that support rather than punish. You stop lying to yourself in subtle ways. You speak inwardly as you would to someone you care for. In time, speaking becomes sacred, not because every word is profound, but because every word is chosen with care. You stop misusing the gift of language. You speak less often, but more honestly. You stop shouting into the world. You start offering something real. This is not about being perfect. You will still misspeak. You will still slip into habit. But now you notice. You feel the residue of unconscious speech, and you return, again and again. Not to be right, but to be real. You begin to feel when a word is ripe, when the moment is calling for it, and when it isn't. You speak, not to control the world, but to meet it, not to impress, but to reveal, not to fill silence, but to honor it. Speech becomes a form of meditation, each sentence an extension of attention, each pause an act of trust, each conversation a chance to wake up. You realize that language is not separate from presence, it's one of its most delicate forms. And in this way, the tongue is unbound, not silenced, not tamed, but freed, to speak truth, to carry care, to reflect presence in a world that often forgets. This is right speech, not as rule, but as rhythm, not as duty, but as devotion, a way of meeting each moment with the fullness of your being, one word at a time. You've now walked gently through the full arc of presence, through silence, breath, movement, stillness, thought, discomfort, repetition, sleep, sound, and even the dreamscape itself. You've seen how presence isn't something you chase or something you earn. It's what's always here, underneath the noise, behind the craving, beyond the words. It, 39. The space that holds your pain without panic, your joy without clinging, your breath without effort. From the quiet wisdom of monks in forests, to the soft edge of sleep, to the still point between footsteps or sentences, you, 39. V's seen that presence isn't a place you visit. It, 39. The home you forgot you were already living in. And now, as your body drifts toward sleep, let this be the final teaching. You don't have to fix anything before resting. You don't have to reach for a better moment. Nothing more is needed. This breath is enough. This stillness is complete. You are already here. If any part of this journey spoke to you, even one phrase, one pause, one breath, leave a comment below and share which moment stayed with you. That's your presence in motion. That's your echo of now. And if you want to keep walking this path together softly, slowly, with honesty and warmth, subscribe to the channel. More presence is waiting, and you don't have to find it alone. Sleep well, friend. You're home.